2024. Two items for discussion this evening. The discussion of the judicial order related to the November election and solid waste master planning, I guess. So, Mr. Russell, you want to maybe talk a little bit about the...
Yeah, I'll try.
Okay.
Normally we don't put things on the agenda unless we have a clear-cut, pathway for the report and either presenting of information or seeking guidance. But as I wrote in here that we're waiting on clarification to occur between County Attorney's Office, County Elections Department, and the court on some clarification. We had hoped to have it by now, but we do not. So we're still in a little bit of limbo in terms of, what those next steps are. But just briefly, and this could change depending upon what information comes back. But there's the potential that he'd rule that the existing seats stay filled by the people that were in there from following the election in November until the next election. That's a feasible possibility. Or it could say that they are vacant, which is another feasible possibility. If they are to stay seated, or even if there's a vacancy, we don't know when that election is going to be. That's up to the county elections, but they're waiting, I think, for information as well, for some clarification. If there are a vacancy, again, by state law, we have 30 days to fill those vacancies. So we don't know if an election is going to be in 90 days, a year, 2 years. We'll have to wait and follow the elections department on that. We will probably just put, and again, I'm hoping for information ideally by Wednesday when we put everything together for next Monday's night. If we don't, I may just put 2 action items on Monday night that could be potential. One would be for the council to declare vacancies if we get that guidance from the courts. And then the second one would be a follow-up appointment to fill those. Now, I know that is up for council deliberation and council's choice on that. But if we're potentially looking at a 90-day window, and the majority of that time will be working on budget-related material, I guess my preference would be that council would appoint people as early as possible. But again, that is council's deliberation. So just kind of putting what my thought process is in terms of having action items potentially being on. And of course, if the clarification says status quo, those agenda items become a moot point. But just kind of wanted to lay out what I'm looking at as we go forward while we're waiting for additional information. And that's all I have on that.
Okay.
Your Honor, unless there's any questions I can take a guess at.
I was just wondering, in terms of the process, when you say you're asking for additional information, is it a formal request to the judge in the case, or what is that? Or is it just a phone call to the court and say, can you answer this question for us?
No, I think the county's attorney's office is asking for somewhat of a declaration in terms of clarification they're looking at as well in terms of time frame. So ours would be, we have an interest in continuing municipal business, as John had mentioned, with full representation from each ward during this time frame. And also we've got a state law to potentially comply with. So just looking at, and I think they're going to put that in their request is, does this mean they're vacant or does it mean that they continue to sit? So that's kind of what the county attorney's office is looking at getting from the courts. So yeah, it's not just but what do you guys think? It's really kind of more of a signed declaration.
And is it clear that the court is the one with the authority for that decision, or is it possible that the county attorney can make that decision, or we as a city can make that decision?
So the court's the ones that made the decision, which is why I think the county attorney's office is trying to put it in front of the courts. Yeah. And that's the best I can answer that.
Yeah. Okay.
When it comes to, let's say the wording comes back that it is vacant, then I think that's why I'd put the agenda item before the council to declare those vacancies at that point in time, because it's a unique scenario in how that goes into effect. So yeah, we're just kind of one step in front of the other as we're trying to navigate through this. So yeah, in terms of where some of that stands, it wasn't crystal clear in terms of state law on some of the stuff, which is why it was in the courts to begin with. So we'll just kind of wait and see what we get back from the county attorney's office.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead, Ms. Dahlman.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. So the couple different scenarios that you laid out for us, if we have to appoint, is the appointments come from the mayor?
So state law identifies it as I believe, just a majority of the council.
The majority of, and could we just appoint, Sam and Carrie back until the election?
You would have that option. There's no prescribed methodology for filling a vacancy within state law. So it just says that a governing body is required to appoint within 30 days by a majority vote of the members.
If I remember right, last time we had to appoint somebody, was it when Randy Kenyon left council?
Yeah.
I believe so.
Randy left council. We basically had a motion from one of the council members, second, and discussion and vote, if I remember right.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look. It's almost, I think we used a weighted average.
Well, you had 7.
Yeah,
6 or
I'd
7
have to go back and look and see. But again, there's no prescribed methodology for the appointment. But to answer your question, Councilmember Dahlman, that is certainly an option.
I mean, because all truth be told, it's not Sam or Carrie's fault that, this is happening to them. But that's just my opinion, and we'll just have to wait and see what comes out in the next week.
When?
That was all. Thank you.
Mr. Graham, you go. And then-
Okay.
Then Mr.
Well,
Dowd.
I guess I'm just wondering, would there then be a difference, not in necessarily the outcome, but a difference in how they would be sitting on the council if we didn't get clarification by the court by next week? Or let's say by the time we go through and bring this up for those action items, if we didn't get clarification and we went through that process and then appointed them back onto the council, but then after doing that, we get the clarification that wasn't the intent, was that his intent was that they were going to stay on there until the next election. Because if the clarification for that comes after we appoint, now we have appointed members on instead of members that were on here from the election.
No, we just want to have essentially placeholders, right, Mr. Russell? Then we get the court, otherwise it would have to be postponed.
You're going to have to clarify your question. I'm a little lost.
You're talking about the agenda items that basically we move forward and appoint
Yeah.
before we hear from the court. Well, I don't think we would do anything on appointment until after we hear.
Yeah, so if we don't hear anything by next Monday,
Yeah.
let's say we don't hear anything by Wednesday when we
Yeah.
put the agenda together, I'd put those two potential action items on, with the caveat that we're anticipating for clarification. If we get clarification, we know what way we need to go, one way or the other. If we don't get clarification, I would postpone either of those actions, respectfully request that Sam and Carrie recuse themselves from any votes,
Okay, I got it.
just not to muddy the waters on that.
Okay.
Because even though we're waiting for clarification, if they come back and say, nope, but there are vacancies effective this date,
Yeah, okay, so
I would
without
just-
without any clarification, we're not making a decision on Monday.
that, at this point, that would
Right.
be my recommendation.
Mr. Dowd.
So in order to comply with state law, when did that 30-day counter start?
That we don't know.
I
Because
would
we don't
think
know
that
if
it
there's a
would came-
vacancy yet.
I would think that it would start as soon as the court ruling happened.
Well, and that's what we're looking for clarification for.
So that would be a good impetus to contact the county attorney and say, if you don't give us direction by this date, we're going to have to do something because of state law.
I think they are, certainly have a vested interest in getting an answer.
Okay.
Now, say we get there, I think there's leniency by any courts as far as if we pass that 30 days while we're waiting for clarification. This is a novel situation, and I think any court would take that into play if we're 32 days from filling a potential vacancy that we didn't know was vacant. And we can make an assumption, but that's why we're seeking clarification.
Gotcha. I'm just trying to cut down on the time that the circus is in town.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly why I say we'll have those on the agenda, even if we don't know by Wednesday. We'll put them on the agenda, and if we need to postpone them, would recommend postponing them.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Okay, second item. Solid waste master planning.
Yes, as you're aware, we had a work session on solid waste master plan and where we're heading into the future. Had a good number of items that we are seeking council direction prior to coming back with a further information related to those. And part of that was the survey that we had going out and being able to evaluate the results. So I'll turn it over to Director of Public Works, Susie Turner, who can deliver the staff report and walk us through those questions and the survey material. Susie.
Thank you, Doug. Good evening, Your Honor and council members. As Doug alluded, we're going to continue our conversation on the development of the solid waste master plan. We had a very in-depth presentation back in January. We're going to circle back to some of those main topics that we're going to need direction from in order to move forward with finalizing the solid waste master planning process. And even before finalizing it, to get together a good draft plan to put in front of council to then finalize the plan. We did complete the survey, so we do have some survey information to review with you as to help aid in our discussion today. Joining us this evening on Zoom is our solid waste consultant, Scott Pasternak. He'll be leading the presentation, so Scott, I kind of have control, and he's going to be talking through it, so I'm sorry if it's a little cumbersome through part of it. But with that, we're just going to jump right into it, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Scott.
Okay. Hey, thank you so much, Susie. Really appreciate that introduction, and good evening, Mayor and council members. Again, Scott Pasternak with Burns & McDonnell. I'm also joined tonight by Philip Kramer, who's our lead consultant, doing a lot of the great work for you for the city of Kalispell. So if we go to the next slide, this just gives a overview of the topics that we want to cover. As Susie just mentioned, we did just complete a customer survey, so we want to give you some of the details on that. And then the primary focus for this evening's discussion is to follow up on the discussion points that we talked with you about back in January, and to recap the questions that we would like to please request council direction on. And once we get that direction from the council on multiple operational and financial issues that we will talk through, Philip, myself, and other Burns & Mac team members will then move forward with the next phase of the analysis. And then I'll provide a slide on this, but essentially we're looking for the direction for council so that we can come back for another in-person workshop on April the 8th to talk to you about the recommendations based on the direction that we get from you all this evening. So if we go to the next slide, this provides a high-level summary of the customer survey. I believe that the results from the customer survey were included as part of your packet for tonight. So we closed the survey on February 14th after it being available for responses for about 4 weeks. There was what we would consider to be a very positive and significant response rate, total of 486 responses divided between 451 Kalispell residents and then 35 business owners and managers of those businesses. And so what we have prepared in the slides tonight is we've taken select results from that survey that are applicable to the different topics that we want to ask for direction on from City Council. So the next slide is where we then introduce the council direction. So these are the 6 discussion points that we talked about in January that we want to bring back up with you all this evening. So really on each one of these 6, we want to present key information, and in many cases, it's just going to be the results of the survey that we just referred to. And what we are please requesting is direction from council based on different options that we will present for you this evening. So the first one that we want to talk about are your couple of key financial policies. And so on this one, I'll just walk through each one of these individually, and then after I provide that little bit of background and provide the question that we're asking, I just turn it back to council, and we would just respectfully request as much direction as you can provide to us so that we can move forward on the analysis. And so it is the city's policy to maintain operating reserves, which we think are very important for the city of Kalispell, given the breadth of your solid waste collection operations. And so our question that we have before you on the slide deck is just asking if you are supportive of continuing to maintain that 40% operating reserve policy. So we'll just pause there to ask if council is in agreement with that, or if you do have any questions for us.
Yes, big question. I mean, 40%, what are the dollars? And I guess, we look in the past we carried 40% because there were times when we dip. I mean, how often do we dip down into that 40%, come back out? What does that cushion need to be? As the size of the budget's growing, does it still need to be 40%?
40%, it's going to cover us for kind of it's our safety net, if you will, for emergencies that happen. If we have a truck that goes down and we have to replace a truck, we have enough in those reserves to immediately go purchase a new truck. If we are not receiving the revenues that we anticipated from the last year, that gives us enough to be sustainable through the next year, so we can still maintain our operations, just our basic operations. That's kind of what that cushion is in there for. And it's just 40% of our operational. It doesn't take into account the capital portion.
Side.
Yeah. So, and it's typically like for streets, we do 50% because it's just a little bit bigger fund. This is a smaller fund. So it's just a normal amount. So we can do those numbers. It's not out of the ordinary for us. We just need to know if there's any red flags with the 40% or if the reserves at all.
Yeah, because comparably, we look at 20% just on the general fund.
Yeah, so the general fund, and that follows best practice at 20%. You add a little bit different components in that it's a very capital-heavy fund on this one. And one of the items, and it's the right question to ask, just as we're doing, master planning, what it's going to be, lowering it or increasing it, it's a one-time hit. You're or if you lower it, you're looking at a one-time benefit because you're still going to maintain whatever that point is. So you may end up with a one-time savings of whatever 10% that annual operating expenditure is. But it's one that is at the foundation of the annual calculation and
It's
what
kind of
they're
like getting a stimulus check from the government.
a little bit. So yes.
We have a few bonds that as we move forward, we'll be bonding for equipment. It also helps
the bonding
make
side.
sure
Yeah.
that we have that security also. So it is, we're in our water and sewer funds. It's required as a part of SRF. And these funds, those BOI loans don't have that requirement, but it helps us maintain that sustainability when we have bonds against a fund. So I also think it's important for that aspect. I'm sorry, Your Honor, I don't have an exact number for you. I didn't bring those.
And I guess a question that I would have is, this is the 40% is what we do, are we being asked this because we're thinking that we're going to be at 20%? And we
It will-
want to
it
bump
will-
up to the 40%, so like, does that affect the rate? You know,
It will.
obviously it would affect the rate, so like, to me, that's the question is how much does it affect the rate to stay at the 40%? I guess, in a nutshell, I would like to stay at 40%, but I don't know what it costs to do that.
And we can, when we move forward in April, we can do it at 40%. And if the rate is a big red flag for everybody, maybe we could come back and reduce it down to 20 or a 30 or something. We could have that discussion. But at least if I leave it at 40 now, we can go through the process of developing a rate schedule based off of 40. And if, like I said, if it comes in really high and we want to try to cut it back, that might be one of the things that we cut back on. Does that make sense,
Yeah, right.
Scott?
Yeah, it certainly does.
Okay.
And right now you do have a fund balance that is higher than the 40%, because right now it's about $1 million. But there is a need to increase the annual assessments across all of your different customer types. And so if you don't increase your assessment, then you would start to pretty significantly draw down on that fund balance. And so what we're really looking for here is the direction to, as best you can, to maintain that 40% fund balance by increasing the amount of that assessment. But also, as Susie said, we'll be prepared for the April discussion to be able to communicate what the impact would be if you would maintain, say, a couple of different percentages as your fund balance ratio,
Okay.
rather than 40%.
Okay.
Yeah, if you could see a 35% and a 30%, it gives you an idea of what each incremental change does to that rate.
Yeah.
And,
So that,
oh,
sorry.
but I think, we can look at best practices of 40%. I just keep looking at everything we keep. It's just we are 1 year behind on the cycle for everything for inflation.
That, I would agree. I also, so as we move through, we're going to have a lot of different scenarios to ask our consultant to run through. So this is just topic number one. So if we already got three going, we have to kind of be considerate on how many scenarios we ask them to run for us too. So
It's just a couple minutes with Excel, right, Scott?
Always
Yeah, always.
right, yeah.
do it in our sleep. How about that?
That's right, yeah.
We could but what we could do on the fund balance, we can communicate for every 10% decrease in that, what the percentage impact would be on your rate. I think that might be hopefully a pretty straightforward way.
Okay.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. What I'm looking at from our last presentation is what appears to be very likely an increase in rates, and to the extent that we can keep that increase as low as possible by affecting this, I'd be interested in doing it. And, so it's really the question of what's the minimum amount we need to be safe, but not too much buffer that we're, affecting rates in a big way. My question is, when you said for one of the purposes of this is for if the revenues don't come in what we expected to kind of like get through the next year, what would be a scenario where those revenues are not coming in? Because the rates are fixed, right? So what's the scenario in which it doesn't come in as expected?
Let's say our customers transition to a different solid waste user. So
Does that happen very often?
Huh?
Does that happen very often, that customers come off of city services and go to a private service?
I wouldn't say often, but I'm luck favors the prepared type of person. You need to be able to adjust to changes in the environment. So, that would be one scenario, is if we lost customers to somebody else coming in and providing a service at a lesser rate, then there is a potential that could happen for us. Or there's the potential that somebody doesn't pay the assessment either, right? So we just have a loss of customers. So there's that potential also.
Go into a market downturn you know, where you have an extensive amount in foreclosure, for example, with back taxes,
Yeah.
maybe a possibility, which
Has happened.
was up.
Yeah.
14
so
years
probably
ago.
just your up and downs in your market and
Yeah,
customer
and so that's
preference.
where I think like this number is, you know, the assumptions are important because, yeah, building in some of that, but not like overestimating the likelihood if it's something that's like a really kind of black swan, really rare event that,
And,
you know, we
we'll
don't
look
have
at
a.
like our debt payments too to make sure that I'm folding that into the equation also.
Yeah, we want to definitely have enough in terms of any requirements for debt coverage.
Yep.
Plus, you know, we only receive throughout the year, but the two primary receivables
Yes.
within our property taxes as well. So all those reserve amounts in any of our fund are built on taking us through that, just on a cash basis while we're waiting for that 6-month disbursement from,
So you always
assessments.
kind of need to have that money there to be able to function until the next tax session is due, if you will. So you kind of always have that in place,
Right.
which actually is really important to have there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that cash flow issue, like you all just mentioned, is really important given the timing of your assessment. Many other cities are able to invoice on more of on a monthly basis. You have a more consistent cash flow. You know, there's definitely efficiencies in how you do your billing, but it does create a need to make sure that you have those adequate reserves. And then Susie mentioned this, alluded to this earlier, but reserves are also really important, you know, just in case, you know, if something unexpected in a bad way would occur. I mean, there are other operations where they've had total losses of vehicles, you know, either from wrecks or unfortunately fires. And so just making sure that if something like that would ever happen, that the city could then look to act quickly to buy replacement vehicles.
I understand,
But we
though. It is
think we
nice
have-
to have numbers with that so you can visualize it. So
Yeah.
we'll make sure we have that prepared for when we meet in April.
Yeah, and I think we have the direction that we need on this topic. So appreciate that perspective and insight. So the next topic that we wanted to ask about is just, again, from a broad policy perspective, when it comes to how we go about designing the rate strategies or for the assessments. There's 3 different options that we want to talk through with you. So historically, and this is relatively typical for cities that offer both residential and commercial services, to have it where your residential services may not pay for the full cost of providing that service. So there is financial assistance from the commercial sector to help offset some of that under recovery from the residential side of the business. And so, are you all able to see the slides? Okay. And just okay,
Yep,
great.
they're up, Scott. Yep.
Okay, great. So what we're looking for now is for these future rate increases that we'll develop just from a strategy perspective to get insight from the council on, would you like for us to continue with how the rates are set now so that future adjustments would be proportional to the current rate structure? So that's item A. And then the second one, which is B, is asking, would you rather go back toward more of a adjustments that are focused more on increasing equity? So in other words, your residential assessments would more fully support the cost of residential operations. And then there's a third option, which is C, which is where you would still continue with the policy of having your rate adjustments for the commercial sector supporting the cost of the residential services. But unlike A, where it would be proportional to your current structure under C, we would work strategically with city staff to determine what those levels would be.
So, number question, how much of a skew is there now?
Scott, are you able to give a proportion of the skew right now?
Yeah, Philip has those numbers at his relative fingerprints with the model opened. And those were numbers that we did share during the last presentation. So Philip, I don't know if you're able to just share your screen at all, or if that's an ability that you have.
Unfortunately, I'm not able to share my screen. If there are further questions, I can look to pull that information together and hopefully have it by the time you all get back
Do you
to me.
want to try that again, Philip?
Oh, sure. Let me try. Thank you.
Get ready for some numbers.
Yeah, ask and you shall receive, right? So what we're looking at here is for each of the 10 years, going from left to right. So column A is where it shows what the different programs are. And so for residential, if you look at row number 5, that shows what your net revenue is. So we're saying that your revenue requirement, your expenses is about $1,163,000, and the amount of revenue generated from your assessments is about $1,047,000. So you have an annual shortfall of about $116,000, and so that same math follows for each of the different types of customers. So the next one is for your commercial 300 and 400 gallon. And so there you're positive by about $12,000. And then for your commercial green bin, you're positive there by about $67,000. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later this evening. But for your additional city services, which are services that are provided for a citywide benefit, you're not generating any direct revenue from that source. So there you're negative by almost $70,000. So specific to the commercial, you're generating about another $77,000 that can be used to offset your residential cost of service.
Well, and this also takes into account where we had the alley service versus roll service, correct?
That's correct. So this is your total cost of service or the net revenue required to perform those cost of services that we've been doing. So it does take into account that. So these numbers could change a little bit just based off of maybe discussions further on in the evening as we break it out. It's a hard question to ask because essentially, typically when we bring something in front of council, we have designated cost of services for each customer class. And in this case, some of our commercial revenues are helping support our our residential services. So, and there's a proportion to that's happening. We can come back with that similar rate structure, keeping the same types of proportions as we have here, or we can change that and shift that proportion a little bit. If you want to increase the residential costs and have them pay for more of their cost of service, then we can do that also. And kind of there is a give and take there. And it's a hard discussion topic. we get it, but I'm going to need a little bit of direction on exactly what that is. And we can come back with a few scenarios on this one too, if you would prefer, doing one just as is and then one a little are just open to direction maybe, or
I guess when you kind of look at it just from 10,000 feet, if you say keep the same proportion, really what we're saying is businesses, we're going to add $500,000 to your bill by 2035. Almost double your bill, so we don't adjust the residential as much.
that could be a potential. You're
Right.
correct, Your Honor. Yes. Yep. And then the other question, as these numbers kind of came forward to staff as we looked at it, we asked if this was typical You know, do other cities do it this way? And Scott can speak to it more, but it is a typical discussion that municipalities have as far as proportioning out the cost of services between residential and commercial for solid waste. Just not something that we're typically used to when we break out our customer classes for our other utilities.
That was my question was what is typical in other cities is that support from commercial supplementing the residential and, you know, our other neighbors around Montana, you know, because raising more rates isn't, you know, a super popular idea, and trying to keep it even. Yeah, just wondering if that's something that, you know, our neighbors are doing.
Right. So I think what's most ideal is if you could have it where each of your customer types are fully recovering their costs. But to answer the question, as Susie said, there are a number of municipalities across the country that will have policies in place where they will over recover from the commercial sector and not as much from their residential customers. That being said, you know, that's not the case with every city. I will mention that for the city of Bozeman, that they do have an over recovery from some of their commercial businesses to help offset what those costs would otherwise be for their residential customers. So that's one city that's relatively nearby that does have a similar financial policy in place or practice.
Mr. Hunter?
Yeah, thank you, Your Honor. I guess I come from a little bit different perspective in that I think about the generation of waste, and obviously there's responsibility with the resident who is going out and buying things and throwing them away, so they have a certain responsibility for their waste that they're generating. But then I also think about, in our household, we try to reduce waste, and we try to shop accordingly, but a lot of times we're not given the option. There's just not the option by the marketplace and the businesses to buy things with less waste generation. And so there's certain responsibility there with the commercial businesses in terms of what they're selling and how they're packaging and so forth. And also selling things that are cheaply made, don't last long, and kind of this throwaway society, which again, partly on the buyer, right, because they're always looking for the cheaper product, incentivizing that. So, but I think there is a shared responsibility there in terms of commercial. And so I'm okay with the commercial subsidizing some of the residential because of that shared responsibility of waste generation. What exactly where that share, you know, breaks out, whether it's our current breakout or something else, I'm not real clear on personally. I don't know how you come to that judgment, but I'm definitely would lean towards commercial subsidy of at least some residential. Of course, that breaks out the one issue I have with that is I know we characterize our multifamily residential as commercial, and that doesn't quite fit in the equation in my mind. I understand that makes sense in some scenarios, but in a lot of sense, it's just more residential, just in one building. And in this instance, I would categorize multifamily as on the residential side rather than on the commercial side.
Kind of blurs the numbers. Maybe it's not as skewed initially. Mr. Graham?
Yeah, I think kind of what I was going to say is maybe kind of along the lines of what you're talking about there, but and you kind of hit it at the end there where, you know, everything commercial isn't, you know, going out and buying stuff that you bring home and end up putting into your own trash, you know. So there is going to be that skew, but I don't really like the idea of going and looking at our commercial, you know, businesses and stuff like that as like a piggy bank to go through and offset the use that residential use puts out there. I think it also just kind of goes to driving up costs to do business in Kalispell. So, you know, you go and you look at these numbers and they start going through and taking off pretty quick in the next couple of years. And so the first one, again, what's that skew? You know, how far away? We see it there. It's not too bad, but then it starts taking off. So, you know, the second one and the third one, I can't remember what the second one said. I think it's more along the lines of, yeah, I think I read that and I hear user pay. It
That
kind
would
of
be
equalizes it
correct.
out a little bit more.
Yep, that would,
So I'm more inclined to be more those two, leaning on B, but A only because that's what we've been doing. But, you know, I don't know what that difference looks like as far as how bad is it on A.
I guess maybe one of my questions, Susie, how hard is it to say of the commercial, this amount is apartment, this is rent, I mean, this is residential, commercial?
yeah, it's difficult for me to answer that.
Yeah.
We have an assessment database. It's not the most user-friendly or easiest to do the breakout. We treat apartment complexes as commercial because that's really how we service it. And there is a lot of waste generated as a part of that. And there's a lot of containers, so we break it out. I would have to go back and do some work to actually break that all out and give out the residential versus commercial if we were to include apartment complexes and all residential as residential, not commercial. So it would take me a little bit to go back and break through that.
Because I mean, I can already hear it on 411, you know. Businesses are carrying the water for the residential, you know what you can just hear what the garbage that goes that isn't based in reality. So I just wonder if there may be a way to make the numbers more clear to understand what is really commercial business enterprise, like, you know, food waste, restaurants and that versus residential. So, Mr. Dowd?
Yeah.
I know this is going to be surprising for everybody, but I'm going to be supporting B only.
Supporting what?
The B option, just because you know I'm going to be against any one demographic paying for another. There's so many things involved with that because that you're not even thinking about. Like the more you charge commercial, the more they have to pay, the less wages they can afford to pay their workers, right? I mean, there's a whole
Or-
cascade of things in there.
Or prices.
Exactly. So, you know, having the tax be accurate to the services you're getting, I think is more clear, and it'll be clearer to the people paying rates. And they don't really pay rates. This is a tax, which is based on a rate, right? It's collected during tax time. But anyway, I just think that there's a lot of pieces of this that people don't take into account that when, you know, we start playing this little shell game to make sure that we don't raise one or the other too much, you end up having one demographic pay for the other one, and you don't really know what the full ramifications of that are.
And I'll just play the devil's advocate because this is an enterprise fund, right?
In a way, yes. It
In a
is
way,
ran
yeah.
like
I mean, yeah, it's like a business, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
When was the last time you looked in on Waste Management's pricing discussion? Oh, they don't have those in public. So we also want to, you know, when we look at what do other cities do, what do other garbage collectors do? What are rates within the general market for the services provided? Because we have to step back, because I will disagree with you, Mr. Dowd. This is elective. I can say, no, I don't want to pay for the city to collect my garbage. I can go to someone else, or I can do it myself. So this is more voluntary. This is someone saying, yeah, I want to sign up for that service. I think it's a good service for a good price. So to me, it's voluntary.
I appreciate that piece of it for sure. It's just, I think people would be surprised. I think businesses would be surprised if they actually knew that they were paying more than it costs to service them.
I also, one of the things to consider, for example, for an apartment complex, which is considered a commercial account, it's by volume, right? So they're being charged for the volume for us to collect and haul it. It's not per unit, right? So let's say you had an apartment complex that had 50 people living in it. You may pay less with the commercial volume than you would if we charged it per residential unit. So there are some considerations. It's not necessarily you're always overcharging because it's a commercial, right? It's by volume for commercial. So like I said, it would take me a little bit to go back and break through some of those different particulars on items. What I'm hearing though is we can break it out and separate the costs, residential versus commercial, and bring that back to council on April 8th. You know, break it out equitably based off the cost of service. And then we can also do another example and keep it as is. So that's what it is as is. And then we can continue the conversation after, during the April work session if we wanted to further divvy it out or do different proportions. Does that sound okay?
Councilor Gabriel has her hand raised.
Ms. Gabriel?
Thank you, Your Honor. I think what Susie just said satisfies my question. I was looking for a little more clarification, and that will definitely help. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep, Mr. Russell.
Yeah, I mean, all the discussions and the perspectives are certainly appropriate. You've heard me say everyone's right based on the perspective they look at it with. The one thing, as we're talking about a commercial operation, for example, and the rate setting, as the mayor alluded to, Councilmember Dowd alluded to. So we're the unique aspect of, we bill based on cost recovery versus a private entity bills on market demand and supply and demand. So people may be paying way more than cost recovery just based on supply and demand principles. So that as you're looking at our service, you got the transparency here that does not equate to another similar entity that isn't out of a government-run component. So just wanted to highlight there that when we say, some operation may be surprised at what they're paying in terms of cost recovery, well, that's because our process is transparent. And we're based on cost recovery for our total. We have no profit margin at the end of the year. It is all kind of built on that whole cost recovery standpoint. So just that was a good opportunity to address public goods and how we account for those.
And we could look at the other extreme because there's one other area in our budget that we do this with called the ambulance. It's a group about that big that contributes the most to that. And then the general fund taxpayer contributes the balance. So that is a huge cost sharing operation. And we don't have to worry about private competition on that because no one wants it.
My attempt to not muddy the waters apparently failed.
I found a
We can go
rabbit
to
trail.
the next one.
So, unless you tell me differently, we will go with options A and B, and then we'll continue the conversation. At least we'll have a starting point and with numbers for everybody to kind of look at, and we'll be able to speak to proportions at that time, given that. Does that sound good, Scott?
Yeah,
Good for
I
you?
was
Okay.
looking to see if I could give you a thumbs up on the within Zoom, but yeah, that works just fine.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll be able to show what the rates would, or the annual assessments would look like for both of those scenarios. And I think once you all are able to see what those dollar amounts are, that can put it into greater perspective on what policy you want to take going forward. And Susie, going back to the request about what is the impact on your residents who are living at multifamily properties, what I would recommend there is maybe just pick 2 or 3 different properties in the city, maybe one that's a relatively larger one and one that's maybe smaller and medium size. And then you could just see what is their annual cost of solid waste services, and then just divide that by the number of units that are in each of those complexes. And I think that'll give you a pretty good idea of what the differences could be between your residents living in single family as compared to multifamily
Yep.
houses.
Yep, we'll do that. I think
Cool.
we'll
Yeah.
we'll work out trying to provide information for everybody to make a good decision. So, thank you, Scott.
All right. Very good. So then, if it's okay with the council, we can move on to the next topic, which is your alley cleanup services. And so this is the slide, like we mentioned earlier, where we are showing some of the results from the survey. And so what this is communicating is there were three questions that focused on alley cleanup services. So I'll just briefly walk you through these from left to right, summarize them, and then walk through what the policy questions are that we want to ask of council. So the first question on the left-hand side is where we ask, how receptive or not would your residents be to having set out limits? And so that would be where you would have it where you're not allowed to set out more than a specified number of items or cubic yards of material of yard trimmings and bulky items that are collected in the alleyways. And so on this one, it was relatively balanced in terms of those who are either very opposed or somewhat opposed, where that was just over 30%. But then a little bit higher than that, about 35% were either very receptive or somewhat receptive. So a pretty balanced response to that question. And then in the middle, we had asked, what would be their receptiveness to reducing the collection frequency? So right now that service is provided on a weekly basis. So we just asked, what if that would be changed to monthly? So on this one, we got, I think, much clearer responses to where 55% said that they were either somewhat or very opposed, and only about 30% being somewhat or very receptive to that. And then the question on the right is where we ask what would be their willingness to pay for a change in the service in terms of to annually pay for this service so that there's equity in paying for the alternative collection service. And so here there's a pretty strong response to say that almost 60% of your residents said they would not expect for there to be a change in the service, the cost of this service. And then you can see on the right-hand side what the percentages were in terms of their willingness to pay for increases of 15, 20, or $25. And these are annual dollar amounts. So in summary, there's definitely a strong opposition to changing the collection frequency, but there is a more balanced perspective on limiting the amount of materials that would be set out. And then as we go to the next slide, this is where we want to ask you a couple of different questions. And those questions are, first one is focused on the service level, and then the second one is then turns our attention again to a rate strategy option. So let me just walk through what the different questions are, and then definitely would like to get the feedback and direction from council. And so the first is for within your alleys, what would be the service level? Would you want it to be kept as is, which is a weekly service? Or would you be interested in considering a reduced service level to where it would be monthly? And then C would be where there would be a reduction in how much material could be set out. And that could be either applied based on a weekly or a monthly service level. The benefit of reducing the set out limits would be to reduce the clutter in the alleyways. I will mention, though, trying to enforce that would definitely be a challenge. And then the second point that we did want to ask about from The rate design options is to ask you with respect to the cost of the alley cleanup services. Do you want to keep the status quo? So essentially the cost of providing the alley service is just built in to your assessment and charged on a citywide basis. So everyone that has either an alley and or the curb service would pay the same amount? Or would you prefer that we develop a rate schedule that's applied only to your alley customers? So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions, or more importantly, take the direction from council.
Can you put those questions up? I just need to look at them.
There,
Oh,
Can you share that?
they should be on the PowerPoint. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Okay, there it is. Well, kind of.
Is there,
That's, yeah, now it's on the full screen.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
is there an advantage to doing a bi-weekly instead of jumping from a weekly to a monthly?
We definitely could talk about that. It would just be a reduced service. Yes.
Just not as much.
Yeah.
And then if I'm remembering this correctly, when it comes to development of a rate schedule applied to alley customers only, we're talking about that in difference from the residential rate because they get more service in the alley
Essentially.
because of the set out products.
Yep. So we have different kind of residential customer classes, if you will, right? We have our rollout containers that don't receive the alley collection cleanup every week. But in our next slides, we're going to talk about spring cleanup, which tries to provide equitable service for collection, right? So we're going to ask the same question for our rollout container customers next. Would you like us to just develop a rate where we are providing the alley collection cost to our alley collection customers, and then not charge that to our curb collection customers? And you'll see in the next, like I said, in the next slide, where we're going to try to establish a rate for our curb collection customers for our spring cleanups.
Do we know what is the more expensive item on everyone's bill if it went to everyone, whether it's the alley cleanup versus the spring cleanup? Which one's the more expensive?
Yeah, the alley service is definitely significantly more expensive than the spring cleanup.
Right. So, we use a rear loader and 2 staff weekly to go collect alley cleanup. So, and for spring cleanup, we do it once a year, and it usually takes us about a week and a half to do it, to go out and collect. So.
Were you finished, Mr. Graham?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have a question about the difference. You mind real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's between alley and rollout. So say a subdivision where you have a rollout customer, and then in the block residential areas where you have alleys, is the difference between those two that an alley is kind of a catch-all where everything, say if it ends up needing to be discarded, it kind of works its way to the back where the alley is? I mean, that's where it gets picked up, but I'm just trying to figure out when you have, say the residences that are on rollout, they don't have the back alley, they have the backyard, but they don't have the back alley. So is it more that they have to rely on getting that to the landfill or wherever they're taking it on their own? Because there's nowhere else for it to go other than maybe in their garage. But, Yeah.
I mean, I think you're capturing the essence of what the city layout is. Your alley customers have, and I think it just kind of is a part of the way solid waste collection developed over time. In our original town site, we had alleys, so we always performed alley collection as a part of our solid waste service. So, and it's just kind of developed from there. So it's always been a part of the city's service for solid waste. is to come by and do alley collection in addition to your typical solid waste. When you move to a different style of subdivision build out, you don't have an alley, so you don't really have a mechanism to go by and collect.
But
That
where
type
I'm
of
kind of
debris.
going with it is without that service, we'll just start building up back in the alley, and because that's where everything kind of gets pushed back to, out of sight, out of mind type of a thing where it just.
Yep. I think there's a definite what if scenarios if we don't provide the alley collection service. Could there be more clutter and debris in the back alleys developed over time? Yeah, for sure. We would rely on the residents to haul and transport that larger debris to the landfill themselves. So would it be a shift in culture, a shift in dynamics for who hauls whose waste to the landfill type of deal? Yeah. So yes. It could create more clutter than what you would anticipate because people are used to the service we provide right now.
Yeah, and I think that gets to the heart of it. It's, there's a lot of, in terms of the first question, a lot of guessing about what the response would be. We heard that last time, and it could be Armageddon, or people adjust. We don't know which it's going to be. Certainly from last discussion, I agree that we should never do it with food waste and anything that's, like that. But in terms of bulky items and stuff, I'm wondering, can we try for a year, monthly service? It will take a few months for residents to kind of adjust and figure out, wait, my stuff's not getting picked up. And so there will be some time there where it's not looking good. But then will they adjust and, hold on to their materials, for a few weeks in their garage or whatever, and then put it out? Or put it out, but it doesn't get too cluttery. I don't, I'd be curious to see if we could try it out for a little bit and just see if it happens. If it is Armageddon, then go back to our old system.
I just make it Armageddon then.
Mr. Dowd?
I'm actually okay with us keeping the collection at the same level, but there's no such thing as a free lunch. Somebody pays for it, right? So that would be commensurate with an increase in rate for alley customers.
Can we bring up the slides again?
So that's, sorry, did you want to?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I wanted to get to that second part, which is the rate. And, my concern when I'm thinking about this in my ward, if I were to venture to guess, the homeowners who are closest to the edge, most struggling with covering their bills, I would say are probably in the west side downtown district of Ward 3, would be my assessment. And so I think about the water and sewer rate increases we've had, the property tax increases we've had. This is likely looking at a higher rate. And there are folks, particularly in that part of town, who are, homeowners, elderly, on a fixed income, who are on the edge. And so I think about them a lot when we're looking at rate increases, and I worry about them a lot when we're looking at rate increases. So to change this to where alley is picked up more just by the alley customers, that's going to put that rate higher. That worries me. So I'm definitely for applying it to the whole town. Being fair, that would also apply to the spring cleanup. And then, but knowing that there's, that cost, try and keep it low. That's what I'm also pushing for, seeing if we can reduce the rate, whether it's bi-weekly or monthly, and just seeing if it works without Armageddon. That's where I'm feeling comfortable.
So I get that. The thing that I think might be hard is if we did reduce the monthly service and then we didn't see compliance with it and we were struggling, we would have to do a rate adjustment to cover the costs of, so
Going back.
I think, right? So, just things to keep in mind, of what we would have to do.
I mean, could you do maybe I'm making this more complicated than it needs to be, but,
What?
yeah, me? What? But because I'm thinking about we'll get to this too on the pay-as-you-throw thing, but, could we try it out without reducing the rate, keeping the rate as if it's, at the current status, try it out, see if it works, and then lower it? So we're not going back and forth, rather than lowering it, seeing it doesn't work, and then raising it back up again.
If that's the direction you want me to go. It does make things a little hard and complicated.
In all reality, cutting it in half every 2 weeks, how does that impact the rate? Go back one slide, if we could. Question 21, maximum increase respondents would be willing to pay annually to ensure all solid waste customers are equitably paying for alternative collection service. So what is alternative collections? That's
alley cleanup.
That's alley cleanup.
Yeah, for this example, that's your alley cleanup.
So Sid, the problem I see with this is the problem that we have everywhere. I don't want to pay my fair share. Everyone else can help cover my costs. That's what 60% of the respondents are saying is, oh, I want to keep it the same, but I don't want to pay for it. So no matter what we do, you get 60% are going to be, well, this isn't right. So trust me, I agree with you 100%. We've heard so many times, pay your fair share. Well, this is pretty easy to figure out what's the fair share.
I'm just thinking about volume, like, do alley customers, I know they have to share a bin, right? But they still have the same volume as a residential customer, a non-alley customer. So really, they're getting extra service for a lower rate or for the same rate as anybody else. So, there are people that are struggling that don't live on an alley as well, right? I don't think people would appreciate knowing that, hey, if I don't live on an alley, I'm paying a little bit extra so that the people can get weekly alley cleanup. I would love to throw stuff out in my front yard and just have you guys come pick it up. But
Or do a drive-by in an alley.
But the homeowners association wouldn't like that very much. But anyway, just my thoughts. I don't think you could get two people in a room that live in those same scenarios and get them to say, yeah, it's okay for the alley guy to get more service for the same, rate.
Yeah, the response to the survey is pretty predictable, right? I want maximum service with the least amount of pay. That's, so it's helpful only to a certain extent.
Maybe we should just give them the choice of, do you want to reduce the level of service or do you want to pay more?
Right.
We can also show you all, this was a slide that we presented in January, but I think it might be beneficial if Phil can have control again to show you what the dollar amounts are that we're talking about. So again, these are on an annualized basis. And so right now your cost of providing your alley cleanup service is only about $13 per year, which is really pretty remarkable when you consider the level of service that's provided. And then so that's in the gray piece of the pie. And then your spring cleanup is far less expensive at just about $1. So there are some differences. And if you're a resident, you could say, hey, if I'm only getting the spring cleanup, yeah, you could make the argument that you should be paying $12 less per year. But I think, when you all are, I think Armageddon is probably maybe an effective word choice there, because if you start making a change in the level of service there in the alley, you probably hear that very loudly from at least some of your residents. So I think really just kind of thinking through, is it worth the level of effort to change those services, and then balancing that with also these important equity issues that we're talking about tonight.
So really, Scott, when I look at this, it's 155 a year, someone with alley cleanup. Or just every residential unit. So if I don't live on an alley, I'm paying $13 a year. So somebody else can get that benefit. And if we figure, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So if you figure half your customers on alleys and half are not, half could see a reduction of $13. So go from 155 to 142, and the others would go to 168. Just
Yeah, yes.
so
That'd
we're
be
talking
how it would be.
$26, $2 a month at the current rates for somebody who's getting more service than someone who isn't. Mr. Dowd?
Jessica has had her hand up for a while.
Oh, Jessica, yep.
Just because something's been done one way forever doesn't mean that it has to be done that way forever on till the end of time. Is my perspective on that. And, I hear the whole Armageddon thing, and there's so much waste in the alley, but it's not equitable. It's not. And the difference between what the people with the pull-out trash cans and what the alley are getting is huge. It's huge. And I mean, I guess I live in an area where the alley is the dump, because it's just crazy how much junk people put out there. And, maybe we do need to make a change. Maybe just because it's been this way forever doesn't mean that it has to be this way forever. I would be more in line with either, having the alley residents pay more for their extra service, or for, if they're getting the extra service, then I think that they should pay for it. And there's really no way that you're going to be able to, monitor that and, ticket anyone for putting extra out, like he had said earlier in the conversation, I think for me, it's just, if they're getting such a bigger level of service, then they should pay for it.
Go ahead, now, Mr. Dowd.
I don't think that's what she said last time, but anyway, because she lives on an alley. Two things. First off, we are really cheating people, because my life is better and richer because I go to the dump a couple times a month. It's an adventure. I love doing it. These alley people are really getting cheated out of like a life experience.
Every Sunday, sometimes it's just to throw out a McDonald's bag.
That's number one. Number two is, let's also remember that the respondents for these questions that were deeper in the survey were about 80 people, as opposed to the way more than that responded to the first part of the survey, right? This is based on like 80 or 86 people, right?
Oh, no,
No,
That's what
400.
that's what the.
Some of the
That's what I thought too.
Yeah, so some of the questions, there was a lower response rate. And so if you're referring to the number that's in the written survey, that's what that reflects.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, God, okay.
Take a choice.
Well,
If you're going down,
Yeah.
so go ahead.
For the
Okay.
alley, for the alley survey, in those, the total respondents for the alley collection, there was 80, respondents. Wherein for the spring collection, there was 220. So yeah, there was a little bit difference in, but part of the survey, I think it's geared you towards what services you had. So then it kind of went, split them up that way.
Yeah, thank you. You just took the words right out of my mouth, so that if you were on an alley or responding as an alley customer, you were only being asked the alley question and not the question about the spring cleanup.
Yeah.
And so that if you add that 80 plus the 200 plus, that gets you above 300. And then, so that means that roughly 75% of your residents responded to those questions because they answered that question for one or the other, but not both.
Sam?
Well, I guess just one thing that I'm looking at is it costs alley folks 26 cents a week for their pickup of alley service. Whereas spring cleanup, it costs $1.05 for one time. I think the alley service is getting a really good deal.
Yeah, and it's a really good deal in terms of for other cities that are providing this level of service. You know, it's more typical for that to be somewhere probably closer to like $4 to $6 per month, and here we're talking about roughly $13 per year.
Yep.
So I mean that's real credit to Gene, Billy, and all the crew that provide that service.
I think too, there's also a step back as you look at what I mean, as part of the collective whole, there is some value to all of us. Having the alleys, I mean, it's kind of like, this is what we pay for on the street tree assessment. We all like the trees. They all benefit everybody in Kalispell. It is part of what we are. Even though I have one, it's about 5 times larger than the thing that Mr. Russell planted.
You mean my red one?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so from exactly what you had said there, I'm not really quite sure how what I'm going to say is going to be received, but I'm glad you said that because I'm looking at it, and now we're kind of throwing some numbers around here, and yeah, there's a added service that you get in being in the alley. But my question is, it seems like at some point there's a built-in benefit where, I mean, we need to keep our alleys clean. And so with these numbers we're looking at, I don't really go through and see a whole lot of it being, I mean, okay, yes, I guess it probably is this residential going through and picking up that cost, or they're getting more of a service in the alleys. But I think that it's a built-in benefit from living in that part of town because we need to keep our alleys clean. If we weren't doing it, are we saying we wouldn't be going through our alleys with the dump trucks ever?
We wouldn't be doing it, or we would be doing reduced services, whichever way you direct us, you want us to provide the service.
Right.
So,
Yeah, but if it becomes a public health issue, is
Right,
what you're
that-
saying, we'd have to do it.
Then you
Well,
get
we'd be
behind on it.
revisiting our nuisance ordinance
Yeah.
for
we
enforcement
would
activity.
rewrite the code. Yeah, you would see we would have to rewrite.
We'd hire
the-
Tim Klusner as a code enforcement officer.
Yeah,
So I guess
Love the authority.
yeah.
I guess where I'm at with that is I see that there's more. I see there's more service that they get, but I think that's one of the benefits of living on an alley is that, and that's kind of where my question was coming from before, is it seems everything kind of moves, to the back of the lot. And we got to keep them clean. So if we didn't do that service, you can't go through and say that everybody's going to be taking their stuff to the dump.
Is it, on the flip side, you can look at snow plowing. We don't charge by the lineal foot in front of your house,
Right.
Yep.
so. Mr. Hunter?
Yeah, and I just point out, I think you mentioned like half and half, half alley. I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think alleys residents are half the population. We're looking at maybe quarter to a third.
I want to say, how many, because you gave me those numbers.
And I was just thinking about the number Sam gave.
No, I
And
thought that the mayor's example, I thought was just kind of a hypothetical. He picked
No, I
a
know, but-
50-50, but that proportion isn't right.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about the numbers that Sam gave, and those alley rates are really cheap, but it has the whole city. If they're small, if they're less than half, they have a bigger proportion of the city that's paying their services than the rollouts. So that's why that could at least partially explain why some of those numbers are much lower.
Mr. Dowd, and then I'll go Ms. Gabriel.
Okay, so those numbers are what their rates that they're paying today equal. But if we're gonna adjust the rates higher for residential and take away the commercial kind of like move over, that might not be an accurate number. Plus, if you look out into the future, I saw that those numbers got a lot bigger, right? So $13 doesn't sound like much right now, but if we look ahead a few years and if we adjust rates to make sure that one's not paying for the other, then that might make a more significant difference.
Ms. Gabriel?
Thank you, Your Honor. I think I almost forgot my question at this point. So a couple of things. Jessica said something that resonated with me, which is they're going to have that service, they need to pay for it, i.e. the folks on the alleys. But more so than that, and I do think there has to be a more equitable service for folks who live on alleys and those who have rollout. So maybe that means they only get picked up in the alley twice a month rather than every week. It's not sustainable, guys. We can't have two dudes in a truck in alleys going on and on and on. We can't do that. So we have to look at how are we going to fix it. So I'd like us to look at something, if not for right now, for really soon now, like in a year, how in the world do we intend to fix this problem? Because it's not going to get better. And I think at least cutting the service in half would be an easier bite for people to take than having it go away altogether. So maybe we start there and reduce it to half as much and increase the curbside spring pickup a little bit more. So we're giving more one place. I don't know. I worry about how this is going to. Susie can't sustain this in her department, and we can't sustain it in our overall budget.
I will just respond to that in saying that for the most part, our alleys are not increasing. Most of our new growth is rollout.
That's correct.
Yeah, and
Yep.
so we're going to be having increasing rollout paying customers with a fixed alley service for the most part. I mean, I think one development in the time I've been here has been included alleys that I remember. So, but yeah, I mean, exactly to Sid's point, I do worry about, we're looking at rate increase due to the inflationary costs. Then we're looking at potentially, depending on what direction we go, shifting commercial subsidy to, more equitable with residential, which I'm not supportive of. And then potentially, shifting, citywide paying for alley to the alleys paying the full cost. That's, you hit all three of those and then all of a sudden, yeah, it's maybe not quite as small numbers as we were looking at earlier, so.
Your Honor.
Yes?
Thank you. My point in that was it's not sustainable I don't care if we're adding more alleys. The staffing is not sustainable to pick up garbage in alleys on an ongoing basis into a perpetuity. We have things that it's not sustainable, whether we add alleys or not. Thank you.
Okay.
Can you bring the slide back up?
Just a quick clarification from Ms. Gabriel. Is she also saying to move the actual garbage collection back to 2 weeks?
No.
Okay.
No, that would be,
Yeah,
this is
that
just for
that could be a
alley service.
disaster.
Yeah, no, just for alley.
Just lawnmowers and
Okay.
washers and dryers and
Yeah.
couches and refrigerators and all the crap that should be hauled to the dump in the first place.
Okay.
Clear as mud. You got
Lot of great discussion going on. I did hear a little more than bi-weekly service instead of weekly service. So, am I seeing nods or
Yes.
monthly?
For everything or just Ally?
Just Ally. So we're just focusing on Ally. Or we could do a reduced, because we'll develop a cost for a reduced service, and that would be every other week service. It's not a full monthly reduction, but it's a somewhat of a reduction. So we can do that cost. So then the next step is we can develop a rate and just charge that to our Ally customers also.
Okay, so a question that I would have about, I mean, I know I brought up the bi-weekly, but I guess a question I have about the bi-weekly then is, would not the same amount of material end up in the alley as it would be weekly?
I
So
would,
then they're gonna be going twice as much to the dump with the truck, because there's gonna be more material there. So I mean, does it work out volume-wise?
it's a great
I
question.
think that is a really great point, especially since the material gets set out in the alley, that it's much more difficult to control or monitor or enforce when a resident is placing that material out in the alley. So you could really end up with what you're saying, where you have same quantity of material, but the trucks are just picking it up every other week instead of weekly.
Yep. Yeah.
and stretching longer and longer
Like,
because they can't. I mean,
yeah.
There's
it
only
would-
so much volume in the
there's only
truck.
so much
so-
volume.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
where I just feel like a trial period would be best. Let's see what happens.
I think maybe to help with that, and maybe it'll be hard to police, but if we were to set out or provide some definite code guidelines as to how much can be placed out in the alley, I think would actually be beneficial to how much would be placed out there. If we could set some of those, that's why we went set out limits. If we could, provide guidelines on this is how much you can set out, this is how much we will collect bi-weekly. So maybe we could start to change culture, if you will, as we move. Maybe. I can see you were not agreeing with me at all when I was saying that, but
How would it be by, like, what would the requirements be? I mean, are people gonna weigh stuff, or is it gotta fit inside this box before you can put it out there like luggage? I don't
Prior
understand.
this week, the washer in 2 weeks.
And if somebody goes out at midnight and puts
Yeah,
bags out
yeah,
there.
one
who's
large
gonna-
bulky item per week. I don't know. I'd really have to think through it and maybe look at other examples to bring back.
I mean, the truth that if we think about, I mean, I want to go walk behind Jessica's house and see what she's talking about. But, I'm thinking, when I'm thinking bulky items, I mean, somebody does a remodel of their kitchen, right? And they have a one-time kind of big surplus stuff, they're probably not going to parcel it out. Is this, I have a hard time because I don't see it on my alley. I don't, other than I have one guy that occasionally puts stuff out, but bulky items, but I'm not seeing this kind of constant every week, big bulky items. So I'm having a hard time imagining just how much stuff it is and what's causing all that waste if it's not kind of remodel or replacement that happens occasionally. I mean,
I hear we're doing
We
a site
collect
visit
a
to
lot.
Jessica's.
Councilman Hunter, there's a lot collected every day in our alley runs.
yeah,
Probably
obviously
might
need
be
to do
the
a tour.
exception, but we are
You've
we
done
are
a ride along with
collecting.
KPD, right?
Yeah, I know. I need to do a ride along.
With
Exactly.
Public Works.
Yep.
I think Carrie's had her hand up for a while.
Who's that, Carrie? Oh, Miss Gabriel? I can't see a hand.
Oh, sorry about that. I think that may have been up from before, but I want to make sure I understand. We're talking about possibly going to every other week, but now we're going to reduce their rate. Is that right? Yet we're not going to reduce the rate for the curb people who still can't put stuff out every week. Is that right?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No, so what we would do is we would develop a rate based off of the cost of service given direction from council tonight. So if you wanted to reduce it to just twice a month collection, we develop a rate for that and apply that rate to our alley customers, not to the curbside customers.
Counselor Fisher.
Oh, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Your Honor. I see a total enforcement problem here. I think if I remodel my home and I haul my countertops out to the alley and it could sit there for a week, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good for the city of Kalispell. If I want to ditch a couch, it doesn't look good if I haul it out on a Tuesday and the service isn't for another 6 days. I think people should haul their larger items to the dump. And this should be all about garbage service. I think that makes it easy for Susie on rates. I just think bigger items have no business sitting out in somebody else's yard. Typically, if there's a garbage can, 2 in an alley, and people are piling up their remodel items in the alley, and kids could get into, people will soon be taking fridges out and everything else that could be a safety issue. I just think we need to get back to garbage service, and people need to haul their stuff to the dump on a trailer. If they want to go once a month, that's their choice. But garbage is garbage. Extra things are extra things, in my opinion.
Second.
Well, if you look at what the commercial non-city people are paying, if they put anything extra out, they just get charged extra.
Okay, but who do you know who it's from?
No, I'm not saying we do that. I'm just saying that if they had the Evergreen service and they put an extra thing out there, they just get charged more.
Yeah, but you don't know who it comes from. In the alley, in the situation.
I'm not suggesting we do that, Jed. I'm just saying that if it wasn't for the city doing this for free for so long, if they had the other service and they did that, they would be charged more.
I understand that. And there's where I agree with Ms. Dahlman. There's a time for change. If people are going to start stacking up unlimited things in the alleyway, it looks like crap to our city. Garbage is garbage. Other things should be hauled away by the person that creates them.
And I got 3 new names for the school board.
Okay, well,
Option three,
I'm circling around. How about this? Could I, if we were to develop an alley, but whatever, be it weekly or monthly, is everybody okay with us developing a rate for that service alone
Yes.
and applying it for the alley collection service being applied to the alley customers?
Yes. I am not, I want to apply citywide.
You want it applied
Just trash, or are you talking everything?
for alley cleanup, just for alley cleanup service.
So I think if I can interject, this is really good discussion, in all honesty, because without the dollars here, we're discussing values, and we're seeing those different values at play, and that's policy making. So really good discussion. And trying to help the process go along, I think it's good to identify, as Susie's trying to get to, some specific components. We're not going to have a unanimous vote on, I don't think, any of these, to be honest. These discussions are really good. I would say, we can come to a certain component. The votes are going to be made later. What's added in, what's taken away, what's applied citywide. So I would just say, I like Susie's approach of developing those 2 different potential rates. So we have that number then after, we've had this discussion, they're going through the values. And then you have the votes, ultimately, of how they get applied. Right. And they're much easier to then, okay, what does it mean then if it is applied universally? You can take that one, if it's $13 per alley, and say that's what it comes back. If it's every 2 weeks, it's $6 per alley, let's just say. Okay, then we get to the actual vote and it comes up, well, no, we want it applied citywide for whatever reasons based on the different components. And then you can just see it's going to lower it in that avenue, or in some cases, it's going to raise it. But I don't think we're going to come to a consensus uniform component, and that's not surprising. We've got competing values, and they're all good backgrounds, all that stuff at play. So just trying to guide Susie and our consultants to be able to move forward, understanding that there's going to be some alternate things, and honestly, to probably capture, there's probably going to be some things that come back with what these rates are that honestly maybe not even be supported by the majority, just because we're trying to capture a consensus in there. So just some understanding of when some of these come back, they may change based on actual council votes and different perspectives on that next work session. So what I'm trying to say is, let's not try and knock ourselves out to get it perfect tonight, because an overriding thing is, what are the values behind how we're making this policy, and how is that then going to play out? Because we may get it all out and we all value this one approach, and then we get back and see that figure, oh, well, actually, I have a different value now to replace it, and that is reasonability. And because it may be at that level that we just don't want to go. So if that makes sense, we can kind of approach it in that line with, trying to narrow down to be able to put a dollar then to whatever that respective variable is. Because as you see, I mean, we're through 3 of 7, 8. It's a lot of complexity in the development of the variables in the rate schedule. So like I say, I think this is just great discussion and great guidance in terms of the values behind it. But unfortunately, sometimes they do compete. Doesn't make one any different than the other. And ultimately, you're going to see numbers associated with those respective variables that then may ultimately go, okay, well, I really like this, but I don't like it that much. Or, well, it wasn't that much favor, but it's not that big of an impact. So yeah, that's fine type thing. So just some understanding that when we come back with some of these numbers, there's going to be some leniency, and we're going to expect that ultimate decisions are going to change, because it's going to be hard to capture a majority consensus on each variable, especially when they're going to come back with, attributes associated with them, namely what that price tag is. So,
Yeah, thank you, Doug. I have enough direction to come back in April to give numbers to options. I'll bring back one with the status quo weekly service as is, and then twice a month, and then I'll talk with the consultant on what those numbers mean exactly. If we can just double them if we want to go up monthly, or divide them by 2 if we, So I'll come back with some reasonable costs for alley collection service based off of our discussion. And like Doug said, if we bring it down and we have that and we decide that we want to get rid of alley service, then we can just cut that out and we'll adjust that accordingly when the vote comes down to it. Okay. Okay, Scott, I think we're ready to go to the next.
Okay. Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, your passion for these issues is awesome. So it's great to see you all as engaged and passionate about this. So we definitely appreciate that. So I think this is a really good segue, though, from alleys to the spring cleanup, since there's been references to that topic. And so here we asked a couple of questions, and again, this was answered only by those customers that received the curbside service. And so here we asked in question 24, how receptive would they be to having 2 scheduled cleanup collection events a year instead of just the one annual spring cleanup? And so here there was a very strong response of interest in that, as you had 17% who were somewhat receptive, and then 45% who were very receptive. And then nobody was, or a very small percentage was opposed to it. And then some people were either neutral or wanting more information. And so, I know some of these survey responses are kind of hard to read, but question number 24, I think, is pretty clear that there is an interest for more collection events for your curbside customers. And then As far as the willingness to potentially pay for those 2 cleanup events per year, again, you're going to have some people who are going to say, yeah, I don't want to pay anything more. But I think it's important to recognize that the percentage of people who are saying that here is much lower than the prior question, where it's only 33%. But then, so there's a relatively higher level of your residents who are recognizing, yeah, if I get more service, there should be an additional cost associated with that. So with that, if we go into the next slide, and so here, what we're looking for your direction on is, first off, do you want us to, in addition to the current service level, to also evaluate what the cost would be for an increased service level? So to go from 1 collection in the spring to, say, possibly a spring and a fall. And then kind of similar to what we were asking about on the alley side, how would you potentially want that rate schedule to be? So is it for all residents where everybody pays the same, or where you would have just the 90-gallon customers paying what they would pay? And I think your answers that you mentioned on the alley side really have to, or they have an impact on what we do here on your 90-gallon customers as well. So we need to be consistent, because if you're looking to charge it one way for the alleys, you need to really have a corresponding rate structure for your 90-gallon customers. So with that, we'll open it up to the council.
To me, it's kind of the same, isn't it? Just here's the cost for 1, or here's the cost for 2, and it's just an add-on. I think we're all in agreement it would be the 90-gallon customers only if we're saying it's the alley customers only for that.
Yep.
But by the time we get done looking at these numbers, we might be it's going to be really interesting.
I just have a question in terms of the need for a second pickup. Are we confronting any problems with the fact that there's only 1 pickup spring cleanup?
It is actually quite challenging because we're doing it once a year. It's a pretty heavy lift for us to go out and do and provide this service. Yeah.
So the thought is with 2, it'll be less per.
It might. Yeah. We're like getting rid of PM.
Much by reducing the labor intensity, that there's not much cost to adding a second one. It costs more to add the second one, but it kind of saves on staff, effort.
Yes.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Councilor Gabriel has her hand raised.
I think we would try to develop more of a specific schedule. I think we were thinking about lining it out a little bit, rolling it out a little bit differently too. So we're in different areas each week or something like that to make it a little bit less hard on staff. Because pretty much I'm shifting all of the responsibilities that we normally do, and we're full loaded to adding in a whole nother task on top of that. So we're just trying to spread things out a little bit.
Because I'm just thinking about the alley conversation where we're talking about services that people have gotten used to, and now we're kind of like, oh, it's not, potentially sustainable. And here we're adding services, but it sounds like the 1 pickup is not sustainable in itself in terms of the intensity of it. So in other words, I don't want to add a service
Not
that we can't.
sustainable. We're doing it. And if we have the staffing and the resources, so if the revenues are bringing in me to bring on staff to be able to do it and the trucks to be able to do it, then I can do it, right? I can provide the service with, when I have the right equipment and staffing to be able to do it. So sustainability sometimes comes with price tag.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Ms. Gabriel, are you going to say scrap it?
Yeah. Yeah. No, what I'm going to say is we may have the staffing now, but I'm going to beat that drum again and say we aren't going to have the staff, and we're going to be looking at raising a budget for more staff to haul more pianos to the dump. I mean, since we're looking at change and policy change here, can we not add some reasonable guidelines as to what cannot be put out there, like pianos or freezers or, stoves and refrigerators? I mean, can we not create some of those guidelines about what our staff are subjected to hauling away? Because there's backs that we have to consider, there's work comp. I mean, it's crazy to haul a piano to the dump and to expect a trash service to do that. That's nuts.
I think that is a really great point. And there are a number of cities that will have as a part of their ordinance the definitions of what can be, the types of materials that can be set out for collection and what is not allowed. Whether it's pianos or, somebody earlier had talked about a remodeling project. And, you don't have to do it this way because every city makes its own decisions, but there are some cities that will say if you have a specific remodel where you hire a contractor, that contractor is going to be responsible for hauling away whatever construction and demolition materials are generated. So we don't need to necessarily walk through all the details of that, but we could definitely describe that as an option as part of the planning document to describe, what types of limits could be considered for this type of program.
If there's a building
Thank
permit
you.
issued, we don't pick up the garbage.
Well, contractors all have to pay to go to the dump. They don't get the free trips that regular citizens get. So I'm sure there's a lot of that stuff that's left behind somebody's house.
That's why Mr. Graham has magnetic signs on his truck.
Right. They know his license plate.
I don't build in the city.
Oh, that's right.
I think with even writing those types of ordinances or code, that would help with the amount of items that are put in the alley also.
Yes.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Doing that.
I mean, the fact that someone's moving, they're remodeling stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
And with this being a plan, we can describe, here's the different options that the city could put in place. And so it would just be at your option, whether it's immediately upon adoption of the plan, or if you just consider that at the appropriate time. But for us to describe that as part of your plan document, I think would provide that as a valuable resource going forward. But I think we've got good direction on the spring and potentially fall cleanup issue. Unless there's any other questions or comments, we can move on to the next
Ms.
topic.
Carlson?
Thank you, Your Honor. Susie, is it possible to put a fee schedule to, say, somebody has a refrigerator, the once or twice a year cleanup, and they want a big item moved? Could you just say that's an extra $50? Or I just got a new water heater. They charged me $100 to haul away my other one, the old one. So if we could do a fee schedule of some sort, or would that be too?
So right now, we do offer a service where we will go collect one bulky item. Right now, it's just a part of your service for paying, but in other municipalities, I know they do charge a fee for that. So we could establish a rate or a schedule for doing once a year pickups or something like that. So, we don't do it very often. It's not.
No, because they get it for free now just by shoving it out.
Yeah,
in the
but
alley.
I mean, like outside of our roll off, our curbside customers, they have the option to call us and we would come haul some stuff for them once a year, like a fridge or something like that. But it's like maybe a once a month type of thing for us. It's just not something that's used a lot in the city. Maybe because nobody knows about it. I don't know.
Well,
Now they
you
do.
know, yeah, now they do.
But I know in other municipalities, they just have rate schedules for those, to the cost to go pick it up and haul it to the landfill for them.
Well, as a new city customer, I always had Evergreen Disposal. They charge a whole lot more. And if you even have one little garbage can or garbage bag, a fraction of outside the lid, they charge you an extra $25. So I'm really happy with the service I get from the city. So thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just being consistent of, on the spring cleanup and fall, if we go that direction as citywide, applying the cost citywide.
Okay. When we develop the cost, then we'll be able to talk about that as we move into the next discussion and actual voting on it. So I think we'll build it so council will have the option to add or subtract things as a part of that. Okay.
One small comment, it just seems like we're super complicating the issue if we put regulations around what you can and can't throw away. Plus, we're now moving into an area where we might be having confrontations with our, our workers because they're not taking something away somebody thinks they should. I don't even know, with the small cost that it is today, I don't know what the rate increase would be, but I mean, we have to really look at, and plus then you have to enforce this, right? If you make regulations of what you can throw away, it has to be enforced, and do we want to make, these guys be the enforcers? I don't know. So it seems like we're making this pretty complicated if we do that, and I don't even know if it's worth us doing it then, if it's going to cause that much overhead.
I think what you're seeing is the result of the tension between service that we've always delivered, costs going up. We're cognizant of the cost. So as we've always said, Mr. Russell, we only charge the fees for the service that are demanded. And what we've seen is, well, I want the service, I just don't want to pay for it. And on the other side, we want the service and we'll pay a little bit for it. That's that tension. And really, when you start, as you say, you start slicing and dicing and trying to make exceptions, you just start creating this mess that you're going to have to hire a person just to take the calls and answer, scheduled, and
I've got a hot tub to remove.
becomes
I
concierge.
appreciate the conversation to maybe put some limits and restrictions on the bigger items. It is challenging for staff to lift a piano into the back of the
An old gun safe.
So that I actually appreciate, because those are challenging lifts for us that could potentially cause some safety issues for our staff. So those, I really actually like that conversation and direction. So.
Oh, by the way, I got a cottonwood tree in my yard I just cut down. It's all out in the front for you to pick up. It's only about 20,000 pounds. Oh, who does?
Councilor Dahlman?
Oh, Miss Dahlman? Yeah, it was good.
Well, it appears. Oh, wait, it appears that Evergreen customers are very well trained. So, I mean, you put something that's not supposed to be there, then it doesn't happen again. So, anyway, just my two thoughts. Thank you.
I just like her more and more every day.
You say like or dislike?
Like.
Oh, good.
Well, it's true. We're evergreen at work. And if our trash can does not close all the way, we're presented with a bill for, like Sandy said, for $25.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Ready to move on to the next item we can beat up?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Awesome.
All right. So this addresses how you want to recover the cost for additional city services. So this was one of the questions from the last work session was what's included in additional city services. So it's everything from servicing different city facilities, city parks, and then collecting junked vehicles, dead animals, providing service downtown association area, as well as litter abatement. And so we worked very closely with solid waste staff and determined that the annual cost of all of these services, and it's shown on the next slide, is about, and this is over on the right-hand side in that table, it's about $76,000 per year. So it's pretty significant or material sum of amount of dollars. And so what we wanted to ask Mayor and Council tonight is to please indicate what your preference would be on how you would want these expenses to be recovered in the future. And so item A would be to have us develop the rate schedule and charge your solid waste customers only. So what that would mean is for those customers that are using Evergreen or another company different from the city, that they would not pay that dollar amount. And that dollar amount, if you charge only the city's solid waste customers, this would be residential and commercial, would be $11.82 per year. And then option B would be to develop the rate schedule for all city properties. And so this would mean even if you're not a city solid waste customer, you would be assessed this dollar amount on an annual basis. So that would drop the amount from the $11.82 to $7.16 per year. And then the third option would be that you could develop a rate schedule and then charge your internal departments for service. So this would mean an increase for other city departments or funding categories like the general fund, public works, and then the other departments that are listed there. So those are the three options that we wanted to request your feedback on. So with that, we'll open it up to you. Any questions and comments that you have.
Okay, Mr. Graham?
I think to me this one's pretty easy because I think there's a shared benefit for all residents, for these additional services. So I mean, I think they should be across the board.
And if you go internal departments, it gets allocated out the same way. I mean, although this is assessed on the tax, this would be assessed as a garbage charge on everybody's tax bill.
Yep.
And internal departments would be built into the general fund and reduce that available on the assessment for general fund.
Yeah, you'd have, if it's within the general fund, you'd have some taken out depending upon the cost center, which would be, impact property tax component. Some would be on rates if they're within one of the enterprises, so it's gonna be where that.
Oh my God.
Oh, I'm sorry. So you're correct, Mayor, that if you applied this internally, everyone says, well, the city should pay for it. Well, the city's made up of all the residents of it, and that's a common, refrain that it's some invisible entity that's generating funds. Well, we're generating funds off of taxes or ratepayers. So it's either going to be paid as part of property taxes or through fees if it's through an internal component with it. If it's on a per parcel arrangement, it'd be similar to our light maintenance district. You'd ask the question of, is this an enterprise? Well, in reality, it operates as an enterprise, but under state law, it's a utility. And that's what it was formed under. So it's not formed under a special district. It's formed under a utility. And this is that MCA that deals with it. So I'll just read it out because I think it's important that everyone knows the basis for what we'd be looking at, which is, it's 69.7.101. A municipality has the power and authority to regulate, establish, and charge as it considers proper rates, charges, and classifications imposed for utility services to its inhabitants and other persons served by municipal utility systems. Rates, charges, and classifications must be reasonable and just. And Councilor Graham, you hit it on it. The individual thing is that it's utilitarian benefit in terms of an animal in the street, a park cleanup. That's basically what we're looking at in these items. So that's where it fall under the per parcel type arrangement. So just looking at what council wants to do with that for guidance. Sandy?
Oh, I was just going to agree with Chad. I think it's a city benefit to everyone, so everyone should be charged.
Junk vehicles, is there not a way to collect back if we know who that owner of that junk vehicle is?
Yeah, I believe so. A lot of times what we are talking about is basically abandoned
Okay.
and no response. And sometimes, if you and you have to get a judgment to then allocate it. And I don't know if we've had much luck in terms of any of those. I know we get some trailers that get hauled off that end
Yeah,
up on.
RV trailers, yeah,
Okay.
they're just left, yeah.
Counselor Fisher also has his hand raised.
Mr. Fisher?
Thank you, Your Honor. I 100% agree with Mr. Graham, and Doug, your explanation of that was spot on. That totally makes sense to me. The benefit for all.
Yeah, we may be unanimous on the issue of how to allocate the billing in terms of, I agree, it's city benefit, so citywide to all residents. And it sounds like in terms of B and C, it's the property owner, they're paying the same amount either way. It's just whether or not it shows up as a fee or a rate on their property bill versus their general property tax that was paid out of general fund going to the individual departments, correct? I mean, it's the same amount.
B and C are somewhat. B and C would be somewhat, have that relationship. A, would it only be those that receive municipal?
Right. No, I mean, yeah, if we, say it's going citywide, then B and C, they're essentially the same. It's just kind of how it appears on your tax bill.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, essentially, it wouldn't be exactly the same for everyone, depending on a whole different set of variables.
Is it part of our mills or not? That's the difference
Yeah.
between B and C. It's within the milled
Yeah,
amount or it's
you're gonna
not.
have a portion on the mills that is gonna be a difference in terms of value of property and things of that nature.
Oh, okay. I see. I
But I
guess
think
in
we
that,
got guidance on that.
Yeah,
yeah, I guess with that clarification, I'd probably go more for C, general fund. I could see people questioning, like, why are, the rates for the service, they're saying, well, I'm picking up garbage, and picking up garbage in a park benefits the whole city. So it seems to me the general fund seems more appropriate source of that.
But if I have a $700,000 house, does it benefit me if the park's cleaned up versus someone with a $500,000 house? Or, to me, I look and that's where it is utilitarian value. We all benefit from it being picked up and cleaned. Kind of like the trees, kind of like the lights, everything else. I'm more inclined with B, just. Mr. Dowd?
I think B is the way to go too, because C actually raises our budget. It has the illusion of raising our budget,
It's true.
right?
Yeah, Governor
B,
Giant Fortune.
B, we can
won't
track
like
it back to the citizens, and, C is out of the general fund, which we have to allocate more budget for.
that. Yeah, we gotta be careful,
Yeah, I know. Somebody will call us out.
That's true.
Well, I would say they would both increase our budget, so I want to be transparent in that.
That's,
However, one impacts 15-10-420, and the other one doesn't.
Okay.
Counselor Dahlman has her hand raised.
Ms. Dahlman?
B, 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 B.
Got it.
Okay, well, I think we got good direction. We'll move on to the next topic.
They're getting easier.
Well,
Oh, they were getting easier.
Maybe not. So recycling, I know is a very important topic, and we do a heck of a lot of work at helping local governments implement and improve on their recycling programs. So this is definitely a topic that's very important to us as it is to the city of Kalispell. And so as it relates to recycling, there were a couple of questions that we wanted to communicate the responses back to you all tonight. And so On the left-hand side, it's the respondents' receptiveness to having recycling collection. So this would be rather than just the current system of your drop-off, to expand that to collection at individual homes. And so here there was a very significant interest in that, where you had more than 70% of your residents were very, very interested or receptive to that idea. So a very strong response, especially when you see over 60% were very receptive. But then on the other hand, when we asked how much more would they be willing to pay for that recycling service, we did get a relatively different answer, to where you had a very significant percentage that in the bottom part of the blue that said that they would not support a rate increase for recycling service. And then across the top of this pie chart, we organized the dollar amounts based on $50, $100, and then $150 and $200. And so while we haven't done the specific financial analysis for Kalispell, based on the cost that the cities of Helena and Bozeman are incurring, we would expect for the cost for a recycling program in Kalispell to be more in that $150 to $200 per year amount, because that includes the cost of not only collection, but then you've got to haul the collected material pretty significant distances for that material to go to a recycling processing facility and then to be sold to market. And so when you look at the dollar amounts that would likely be needed to provide that collection service, it's only probably in that 10 to 15% range of your residents that would be willing to pay what it would likely cost to provide that service in Kalispell. And so with that in mind, we have really a two-part question. And so the first question that we want to ask is, do you support further analysis of a recycling program in Kalispell? And then if you would say yes to that, then our next question would be if you would support further analysis of the pay-as-you-throw or variable rate pricing in Kalispell. And we've structured the second question this way, in that if your answer to whether you support a recycling program in Kalispell is no, then our recommendation would be to also not further consider pay-as-you-throw, because in order for pay-as-you-throw to be effective, you really need to have a recycling collection program. So hopefully that makes sense as far as how we structured these two questions, and we would just ask that you please talk about these two questions in sequence, so to get hopefully direction on that first question first, and then if necessary, the consideration of the second question.
And just to be clear, like if it's $150 a month, that's for everybody across the city to pay, correct?
Yes, that would
All
be
the customer base.
Yeah.
So everybody who's a City of Kalispell customer would pay that, whether it's $150 or possibly $200 per year.
That's year, not month. Yeah.
Year or
Sorry,
month?
A year,
That is
sorry.
per
Thank you.
A year,
Per year.
thank you,
Thank you.
yeah.
Per
Sorry.
year.
I'm used to using monthly fees, so, yeah, a year.
Yeah. Same there. We usually see these on a monthly basis, so we hear you there.
Not willing to pay anything additional for what I get now, but I'll pay a lot more for recycling. It's Mr. Dodd, I'm gonna start there and work this way and then go online.
All right, no.
Yeah.
That's all I had to say.
There you go.
Well,
So,
oh, you're good.
yeah, so I definitely have something to say about this one.
How dare I?
Yeah, no, it's just, of course, this would be a topic I'm gonna weigh in. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm very interested in recycling, but I think about the environmental impact of that is the benefit of recycling, and the likelihood that you're wiping that out by transporting it to Spokane in terms of emissions. And so I don't think you benefit environmentally when you're shipping at such long distances. I don't have an analysis to tell me that. I'd be curious. I mean, it'd be great if we could do some sort of analysis like that to know. But off the top of my head, I would think that you pretty much wipe out whatever benefit you get environmentally by that transportation. So I think recycling makes probably most sense if we had local recycling center, local use. I think doing that would probably require partnering with Whitefish, Columbia Falls, ideally the county as well, although that would be very challenging. And, you know, Councilor Dahlman has raised with me, you know, this idea of recycling glass, and you produce sand. We saw it in the public comment as well. You provide that sand for local construction purposes. There's other communities that have set up recycling of construction waste and kind of a resale store and kind of a large scale where the construction industry relies very heavily and kind of remodeling efforts locally rely very heavily on that recycled content from construction waste. You know, Pacific Steel does have a program with some of the metal recycling, you know, looking at that. Can we scale that up? That's where I see the opportunity here, but probably not if we're shipping it. So that's where I would be on it. And then and that obviously would affect the price of things. And then in terms of pay as you throw, I don't see it as recycling. Yes, only then do you get to pay as you throw, because I still see, as I mentioned last time, a benefit to pay as you throw in reducing consumption, regardless of whether you're recycling. That provides an incentive for somebody to reduce their waste just through reducing consumption or composting on their property, using in the garden and so forth. And I know there was an issue about the cost of kind of buying the bins in advance and that sort of thing. So I was thinking about that. And one of the things I'm wondering whether we could do is, again, survey our residents that have rollout and say, you know, what size bin, if we went this route, you know, what size bin would you want to use, and kind of make a purchase based on that information. And then if people wanted to switch and say, oh, you know, I got a too small one, it turns out I need bigger, rather than having some in reserve that we purchase in excess, say, okay, but you're going to have to wait until our annual purchase, you know, opportunity, and then you'll get your higher bin and the different rate. And then just do kind of like a once a year purchase. So we're not buying a bunch in advance and having to store them for that, you know. I don't know if that's realistic, practical, but just a thought of how to maybe resolve that issue of having to store all these excess bins and the potential of, you know, people changing their minds and that sort of thing.
I think we kind of talked about that last time, that there's an awful lot of fixed costs that goes in. You look at the reduced volume versus the volume of what we currently have. The savings would be fairly small based on what we have to allocate for a fixed cost, or your larger service gets so far. I mean, there's, see what you're trying to get at, but we also have a heavy fixed investment, that the more we reduce that cost, we reduce revenue. And then you're going, oh, now we can't quite carry the.
Well, there's not a savings for us. It's the consumption that, as Councilman Hunter was referring to, and it's more of a global perspective. It's not a cost component, because
No,
the
it's
pay as you throw is tipping fee.
Right.
But we don't
But we
save
have
on that.
that's what I'm saying. We have a fixed cost.
Yeah, because ours is collection.
Right.
So it costs as much for me to collect at my house, let's say with a full 90 gallon, as it does my neighbors with maybe a half full. it's still the same collection cost. It's, I think if I'm correct, Mr. Hunter, it's just a more global on consumption and trying to reduce consumption, but it's not there is no cost savings.
Right, no, there is no cost saving, and that's what I'm saying. You gotta be careful what you do with that cost savings, I mean, with the reducing of fees, because then you're going, now we can't cover the cost. So there's a fixed cost no matter what that you gotta cover as a component of this. That is homogeneous really across every customer.
Yeah, it's really similar to when we do our utility, you have a base fee, your base cost, and ours are personnel and trucks, so we still have to drive there, we still have to collect it, and we still have to haul it to landfill. So those costs don't change, whether it's 50 gallons or 90 gallons.
Right.
So there's not going to be much of a cost savings, if you will, for the customer who chooses to have a smaller bin. So not a lot of benefit to it at this point. And I know when talking through it with Scott, you kind of combine the two when you have a good recycling program, because the wastes are reduced and because you're going there twice, so you can kind of compensate for that when you have a recycling program that takes half that waste for you. And that's why we combine them together, and we ask the question as a two-parter.
But you could still have a reduced waste even without a recycling program. That was kind of my point.
You could, but in this aspect, you don't reduce costs whatsoever. Whereas when you have a recycling program, you
Oh, you pick up the
potentially-
cost. Oh,
Yeah,
gotcha.
yeah. So, yeah, it's just
You could still have the smaller one, but they'd still pay the same amount.
as far as
I know.
buying containers, we buy them in bulk to get the best price. So we buy 250 at a time. Is how we do it. So you just don't go buy one or two of them. It is a bulk purchase to keep the costs down.
Yeah.
Right now we pay $83 per 90-gallon rollout. So
Yeah, I mean, my thinking would be that if you waited a year, you'd have enough that you'd still be buying in bulk. I mean, I don't know about 250. I have no idea how many you would be getting after a year's time, but that would be the idea, is that you're waiting until you get enough people saying, oh, I want this one instead of that one, to where then when you make your purchase, you still have a bulk purchase. And I understand that the pricing in terms of the cost to the city wouldn't be different, but you'd have a pricing difference based on, the incentive, disincentive that you're trying to create. And, obviously you'd want, and that's partly where you get your survey, and then, of course, past experience would provide you with information about generally what that breakout's going to be. And so that you need the rates at a certain point to ensure that you're always going to cover your base cost. But
That's essentially what we're doing, though. Covering our base cost.
covering our base costs, yeah.
Yeah.
right.
Regardless of the size of the container, we're already doing that. So really, if someone says, I want to reduce size container, you know what, we're really gonna, in essence, if we do have a variable on what we bill them, it's gonna be a very small savings based on.
But it doesn't have, like, we can set that price depending on where we think the disincentive incentive is.
Yeah, and it's,
Yeah, you definitely could do that, but I think another challenge is that since you're in an open market, have a competitor for residential services, potentially understand what the pricing strategy is, and then for your larger size customers, look to undercut your pricing. And we do a lot of rate design strategies focused on variable rates. And so, as has already been mentioned here tonight, it's really important to make sure that you recover all of those fixed costs, but then when you have the flexibility is on your variable cost, which would typically be your cost to disposal. So even though there is a cost of landfilling, it's not incurred by the city as part of the city's assessment. So that just makes really figuring out a way to develop a meaningful variable rate structure that's financially based just becomes that much more challenging in Kalispell.
Mr. Graham, anything?
Yeah, I agree with Councilman Hunter on. I'm a no on both of those, but it's like you were saying. environmental benefit to shipping stuff to Spokane, you lose the benefit of the recycling on that end of it. And it's actually kind of been one of my pet peeves about the whole discussion about recycling. And, I see this, the very receptive 63% about the recycling program. That's just based off of that question. But I wonder how many people know how that works here in the valley for recycling. I mean, it's a very general question. Like, do you support recycling collection? Yeah, I do. But when you get down into the details, does it work? No, it doesn't work. And so, that's why I would go through and not support a further analysis of that for Kalispell. Other places, I'm sure it works. But the pay as you throw, I don't support that. Anything further on that either, because of what we've been talking about. You just have to have that fixed cost. If somebody wanted to go through and have a smaller, trash can, if they wanted to have a smaller one and pay the same amount, then they could do that. But you got to buy them. So to me, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't work.
Well, I'll keep this short, and as my great friend down on the end there eloquently said, no.
You took 10 times longer to say
Yep.
that.
Yeah.
About no.
But there's two questions there.
No.
Oh, okay, no and no, and no again.
Okay. Any,
People online.
online?
So Carrie and Jed and Jessica.
Carrie?
Look at that.
Well, I'm a little shocked by the discussion. I do support recycling. I do think there's benefits to doing it. I do think it can be beneficial. There is a company in the valley that is a private company that does do it. And perhaps we could figure out a way to partner with somebody that's already doing it rather than reinventing the wheel. The local companies, Pacific Steel does, certain steels and metals, aluminum. I haul them there. I don't get any cost benefit, but at least it's going somewhere other than into our landfill. I think there are ways to do it, and I know that it can't all be done right here in the valley, and it does have to be sent elsewhere. The glass recycling is a brilliant idea. There is a guy here that was doing it, but isn't doing it anymore. He's on hiatus, apparently due to not having a location to be able to operate anymore. He lost his lease on the space he was using, but he was creating the sand that can be used for all sorts of different purposes. So I don't think it's necessarily the city's job to get into the recycling business. But I think it's short-sighted of us not to try to explore some type of partnership with someone else in that arena.
And I think, Ms. Gabriel, that's more of a secondary discussion over what we're looking at here. We're trying to establish a base level of service. If there's a public-private partnership that can be developed, I think that's really got to come from the private business side, looking for, here's a proposal. Because the other flip side of that is, if they do go out of business, now we have a service that we're doing through the city, and we've got to scramble to try to find what's the outlet for it. So I think I agree that there's some great potential there, but I also look at, we've just been talking about the complexity of, or the issue that we don't have enough people to do alley pickup, but how do we accommodate recycling as well? And that's where I'd rather see a private-public partnership driven more by the private business side and how to work with us. And welcome the conversation.
Counselor Fisher and Dahlman.
I'll go Mr. Fisher. I'm just going left to right on my screen. Mr. Fisher.
Hello. Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Gabriel, I agree with much of what you said, but Mayor, totally agree with you. This is a private venture, and I am no for government. I agree with the other counselors.
Ms. Dahlman?
Oh, I have a complex opinion on this. I am also in agreement with Councilor Hunter that you kind of negate the benefit of it by shipping it, and I don't have any solid numbers, but I know that this has been something that's been proven before, and I think it's worth exploring. I think we live in a very unique kind of community because we have, multiple cities that are very close to us that have, some substantial numbers to them. And I think that, maybe, partnering with those interested parties could bring about a bigger conversation. I think that it behooves us to continue this conversation about it. I do support both of them from a philosophical standpoint, and I understand what you all are saying about the numbers and how it all ends up on the bottom of the sheet. I get that, but at some point, I know we talked about. Sorry, my dogs. I know we talked about the landfill having, many more years, but those years are going to get here sooner than we think. And we've got to start thinking about that space now. Now is the time to start thinking about it. And, I do support all of the, looking into it further. It's a hard one. It definitely is. And of course, Mr. Fishlich with the glass recycling, he was definitely onto something. And I think that that's a sellable product, honestly, for a lot of, LEED certified buildings, are looking for a, sand substitute that could be made out of recycled glass. So I think that there could be some cost down the road, some benefit from that. So I do support them and I don't support it. So it's a complicated answer. I don't want to say no on them because, philosophically, I do believe that it's something that we need to tackle now. We need to start thinking about it. So I'm a yes. Thank you.
Okay.
So on this one, and please correct me if I'm reading it the wrong way, and I'm going to try and, wrap it up, but I kind of got a 7-2 consensus on this. And the reason why I think this one's important, because it'll take a lot more work to put these items together, and the consultants online can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but you're basically establishing new utility by creating a recycling program. And so if it is a 7-2 and we can take this one off the board, I'll save a lot of time and effort that we are paying for in terms of our consultant packages. So if we're okay with that and we do all feel that that is a consensus, doesn't mean we have to abandon the thought, but maybe not keep it as part of this discussion as we're looking for our potential master plan and our rate structure. And it can always be revisited as discussion later on. So I'm not saying to eliminate it, but just at this point, you can eliminate a couple of these variables as it comes back to council for revisiting when we come back with, like, say, the master plan and a potential rate schedule. Does that sound fair?
I would agree with that.
Suzie, is that what you're kind of looking for?
Yeah, and and we'll summarize this and provide, high-level recommendations to continue the conversation if council wants to in the future as a part of the master plan document. So it doesn't mean the conversation goes away. It just goes away at this point to develop the immediate short-term rate schedule for what policies we're developing tonight.
Councilor Dahlman raised her, or Gabriel raised her hand again.
Ms. Gabriel?
I can be in support of that, as long eliminating it as a possibility of a utility. but I would really, really like us to have some serious discussion about what it could look like. I don't know how that looks. I don't have any idea what needs to happen, but I like Councilwoman Jessica Dahlman just said a little bit ago. Tired, guys. Sorry, I'm sick and I'm running on fumes. We're running out of space, so we've got to figure something out, even if it isn't our own utility. Pretty soon, we're not going to have anywhere to put it. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, I just would echo that obviously a recycling program that is locally based is not something we're going to solve tonight or part of this discussion. That's going to be a big effort, and I agree with Councilor Dahlman and Gabriel that we should begin that discussion and that work to identify how that might happen. I mean, that's probably years worth of work of figuring out what that even looks like. So.
Really, really great discussion. And we have one more topic. And actually, I think we could probably move through this topic really fast in just listening to our conversation. So our next topic is going to be the whether we move into a front load scenario and getting a cost for that. I'll let Scott kind of talk through that real quick. But if it comes down to us creating just a cost to be able to make the decision later in the April maybe discussion, we can just develop this cost and talk about it in April. Moreover, what we're looking, if nobody wants us to move forward with front end, then let me know tonight and then we won't do that effort. But if it's a maybe, then we'll move forward with it. So Scott, do you want to?
Yeah, definitely. I will just real briefly, because I know it's getting late, but on the recycling front, we definitely take that issue very seriously. And even if it's not financially viable, look at curbside now within the plan, we will describe the other options that are available, such as drop-off programs that you all referenced. And then we can also describe how, if things change in the future, that there could be another opportunity to look at recycling collection in the future. But then, as Susie mentioned, on the front load collection, we're just really want to make sure that the council is comfortable with us further evaluating this topic. And this is one where we've actually made quite a bit of headway in our analysis already, to where city staff has been very helpful in helping us to understand how many customers could potentially look to move to front load service. And so we did ask the question on the survey about the receptiveness to transition to front load dumpsters and collection. So here, vast majority of the customers, and this was a smaller response from businesses, those who did respond were either, for the most part, very receptive or somewhat receptive. And then, kind of similar to the other questions about willingness to pay, there wasn't a whole lot of support for that. But at the same time, my guess is that they probably don't have a real understanding of exactly how much they're paying for these services anyhow. So as Susie mentioned, all we're looking for here is just whether you would support us moving forward with developing the analysis to develop the rate schedule for the commercial front load services, and then it would later be up to the council to decide whether the city wants to move forward with actually implementing it. This is really just to get the direction on doing the analysis. So with that, I'll turn it back over.
Yeah.
Seemed like a lot want to pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense to take a look at it. I mean, there seems to be a lot of benefit to doing front loader, is what the impression I'm getting, that it's more efficient and kind of easier in a lot of ways. My one hesitation, I guess, on it, other than looking at the price, but it looks, just on that 50 extra customers, it looks like the price will make sense. But my one hesitation on it goes back to the concept of pay as you throw. If it's added capacity, that provides an incentive for more waste generation. And I want to provide disincentives for waste generation, not incentives. So that's my hesitancy. I don't know to what level that effect we would really see, especially when it comes to the commercial side of things. So, and I don't know how to anticipate that, but that's my one hesitation on it.
There is actually a greater opportunity for pay-as-you-throw on the commercial side, because there you are able to charge customers for different size containers and different collection frequencies. So that customer who has service, say, 3 or 4 times a week is going to pay a higher amount than somebody who only needs it once a week. So commercial is an area where we essentially already do have a pay-as-you-throw type
You
system.
kind of do, yeah.
Yeah, I
I
was
was
just-
say, we
I was
we
gonna
kind
say-
of already have that, you know.
okay.
Varying levels of,
Rate more, you pay more.
Okay,
Because it's
great.
by volume, so.
Well, good.
yeah, frequency based.
Yep.
I know some get a lot more frequent than others, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Chad, because the mayor asked if I'd take control while he's out.
Oh.
I'm not an elected official, so I refuse to take control of the meeting. I don't refuse, but I'd kind of turn it over to the council president.
I'm gonna go over in here.
You gonna adjourn it that quick?
You're out
I
of
don't
here.
even need this.
And he's back.
He just wanted to give you a taste. That's
You couldn't filibuster?
I morally, I couldn't, I said, I'm not an elected official here.
Oh, you had to come get the hammer. I could have thrown you the little hammer.
So, yeah, if nobody is really opposed to us moving forward, I still think it's a really good option for us to review and discuss further. So I think we'll just move on from this topic. And really, that is the last topic we have to review tonight. So,
Jessica, you
I'm
had-
sorry, Jessica.
That's okay. I was just gonna say yes. That's it.
All right. I know this was a really long work session, and I really do appreciate the discussion and the feedback. It'll help us a lot in what we're going to bring back to you in April, and I fully intend for us to have further discussions with a little bit more substantive information for council to go through. But really, we don't really need to belabor anything anymore unless anybody has any follow-up questions or anything. We will get back in front of you with rate development options. I think 12 of them, actually. And then kind of a draft overview of our master plan. So pretty excited. It's going to be a great meeting.
Okay.
Thank
Anything
you
else?
very
Any
much,
other-
Scott.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Philip, as well. But
Thanks.
Yeah. okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Have a good night. Thank you so much. Okay. Bye-bye.
About this, I mean, I can just talk about it.
Well, go ahead. We're
right.
on it.
Well, I guess I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the discussion on this item because, the way things have been going, there's been a lot of cost increase across the board that we've been having to go through and talk about, and I was not going through and looking forward to this conversation. But I think one of the things that really helps me out with this is it's a lot different because I feel like I have more control as a council than say going through and having a discussion about the water rate, because there's just so many things about, the water system that we're not engineers, and so, we get the numbers put in front of us and we're like, well, I mean, that's a water quality issue, or that's a supply issue, or, or getting drill issue or whatever it is. But this is policy, getting into this and being able to go through and craft this. This was fun, and also being able to go and try to do what we can to keep this cost down, this added future cost down. So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay.
You have one person online if you want to ask her public comment.
Oh. Yes, public comment. Is there any public comment? No public comment. City manager, Mr. Russell.
Okay. I'll try and move through these quick. I meant to bring this up at the last meeting, and we got sidetracked on a couple other different issues, and it skipped my mind. But, get questions on the status of the Charles Hotel, where that's at. Their deadline comes up at the end of the month, and, we've extended it at the staff level and things, we're moving forward. And at this point, with this deadline, we've asked them if they want to extend it to come before council. So we've kind of set aside that second meeting in March for them to approach council if they so desire. And if they don't, then really it expires. So just wanted the council and the public to be aware of where that's at, and we may see them before it. And we'll just leave it at that. But the flip side of that is parking lot at 3rd and Main was going to have some environmental cleanup as part of that project once it transferred ownership and fell into a brownfield classification. Well, at this point, it looks like DEQ and EPA have agreed to cover those costs even if it stays within Kalispell's ownership. So we're going to start looking at a remediation of that site. I wanted to have that discussion in front of the council first and publicly, because once any type of remediation starts, there's going to be a lot of questions, and we'll put out some notice about what's occurring. But one, it's a great opportunity, going to have to be done at some point no matter what. And if we can get it done right now and fall under those classifications with EPA and DEQ where they take care of those costs, that just means we have that much more valuable of a lot in the future if we end up doing anything later on with that. So that could start as soon as in the next couple of weeks on any type of remediation.
I'm just, I guess that raised a question for me in terms of the current parking. I know CAP using a lot of the parking there, they have the new space, but they're not moved over there in terms of impacting that. I assume if you're doing remediation, the parking lot goes away, right?
Yeah, they'll be impacting. I don't know to what extent, if it's going to be closing off the full lot. It's certainly possible. Our parking management will, notify any of those things. I think they're talking about anywhere from a couple days to maybe a week of an impact. So it's not all throughout there, but it may impact some of those permit holders. There's definitely no doubt. So they'd have to reach out and contact with that related to any of the impact that might be there.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, to the extent that we can, obviously let them know as soon as possible, and then if we can do like half the parking lot one time and half the other, or any way to accommodate, that would be appreciated.
So other items, and I already mentioned no meeting on the 11th as we have National League of Cities. I will also be out tomorrow afternoon at state meetings for the rest of this week. In addition to outreach on that parking lot and the environmental cleanup, you'll also start seeing a lot more public information on the Safe Streets for All project, which is the downtown corridor analysis and review. That'll start ramping up. And then the last thing is ballots on the dedicated responder levy should be mailed out, I believe, this Wednesday. So we're into that voting period, and you'll see continued media going out, radio spots, some commercials. So really just trying to continue to educate the public as much as we can as it relates to that dedicated levy. That's all I have.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Russell. Anything from council?
Your Honor.
Ms. Gabriel?
Thank you. Just quickly, and I don't want to put Susie on the spot, just wanted to ask if she can update anything for council on there was a thing I think it was in the Daily Montanan today about the EPA and contaminants in the water system. Is there any kind of update you can give us on? I know you don't have a full-on update because they just found it, but can you update us on what that process will be?
Yeah, we did a work session with council. It was probably over a year ago, and it was the emerging contaminants work session where I brought forth discussions on PFAS, the lead and copper rule, and I think manganese, excuse me. So yeah, as a part of our UCMR sampling, so we're a public water supply. We're required to do UCMR sampling. That's required by EPA. And PFAS was actually the full component of the UCMR 5 sampling. So we did get several hits, if you will, from some of our wells sites on those. That information is going out to the public. Well, it's obviously it's always public information, and we did have the Daily Montanian?
Yep.
Yeah, do a newspaper article on it. They got all of our sampling results, which again is actually going out in our consumer confidence report. So every year we're required to provide our public our sampling results. So it was just a little bit earlier than what we normally do on our consumer confidence results. So that information would be sent out by us in May, typically each year. But we've created a website that also educates the public on health advisories via recommendations by the EPA on PFAS and levels of PFAS that we've sampled in our water source. As far as moving forward, have a couple meetings scheduled here. One of them is with DEQ. To look at the process for potentially drilling a couple new water sources to replace the water sources that we've got. We had that contaminant show up in. But I don't want to throw out these huge. I would encourage the public to give us a call so we're able to talk through the process with them and provide all of the relevant information. For one of the wells, it was a one-time sample point. We're ordering bottles. We'll be sampling all of our wells again here within the month. We'll do another round of sampling on every one of our wells, and then we're going to do it again this summer. So statistically, we have one sample point for one well that it was just a one point in time. So we need to get a little bit stronger data to kind of see if there is actually a trend of an influence of PFAS in our water source. At this time, I have no idea where it would be coming from. I'm just kind of starting to work through some of the process on that. Do have a meeting with DEQ to kind of help us through this process, and like I said, maybe potentially get a different water source to replace those ones. If it proves that they have a consistent source of PFAS that is coming in to our water source. So just working through the process.
Thanks, Susie.
I think it's important to recognize it. PFAS at this point are not a regulated contaminant. So we haven't gone outside of any public water supply rule or regulation. It's a newer, I guess it's not a new contaminant because but EPA has brought PFAS into the limelight and are moving forward with certain regulations on it. But at this time, there are no drinking water regulations on PFAS. There are health advisories out there on certain levels, but there are no drinking water standards. Now, they are forthcoming, and that was part of the presentation that I gave last year, is they're forthcoming. So we will have regulations on them, but what those are, at this point, I couldn't tell you.
Could you remind us, what are some type of sources of PFAS that might, be possibilities for sources?
So PFAS are forever chemicals, and they're used in pretty much everyday. They're a very prevalent everyday chemical. It's used as it's Teflon. It's they are chemicals that are heat resistant, and they're waterproof, and they're really good. They're sometimes the waxy film on pizza boxes, so it prevents the grease from soaking through the pizza boxes. So there's, it's one time it was applied on the pizza boxes, on the wrappers of certain food wrappers, and it's in your clothing. It's in your, as you wash, as you get like some of the more high-tech clothing, there's components in your high-tech clothing gets washed out, into the wastewater. I'd be happy. I'll send out an email just to remind council of all the products where PFAS could be a potential. But as far as where it's coming into our source water, I don't want to speculate. I don't know where it came from.
And you said more than one well, or just one well with one sample, or?
2 wells.
2 wells.
Yep.
Okay. I mean, I know more information, and maybe it's not appropriate until we get the more information, but in terms of which wells and what the reading levels were, I mean, I'm curious
Yeah,
about that.
I don't know them off the top of my head at this point. I know what wells they are.
Yeah, if you could send that out with that email, I'd appreciate it.
And the only reason I asked the question is it is out in this article, and I know we're all going to get questions. So I
Yeah,
know Susie's working on it, and it will be coming forward.
yeah, and there's already a link on our website. So we did create a web page. So if
Perfect.
you go into Public Works and you go into the water page, there's a link on the left-hand column that talks about PFAS, and it goes through pretty much everything I just outlined tonight as a part of that. So it's pretty much a health advisory and considerations. And the best thing to do, I would say, is to direct them to Joe Schrader, our utility superintendent, or myself, and I'll be happy to walk anybody through any concerns that they might have as a part of that. As you said, it is kind of new to us too, and we're working through it diligently to kind of address what we can based off of what we know now.
Okay. Anything else from council? So I've been thinking about this for a while. One, I really appreciate the discussion tonight. I think it's nice to see the council working together, expressing the different views and looking at policy, as you said, Mr. Graham. But I wanted to just kind of bring us back to the reality of these costs and what we're dealing with. Because I had someone ask me the other day, so with all this growth, how come we need a levy? And I said, well, it's because of the growth that we've been able to maintain the services that we have. And so what I thought I'd do is here's a simple example. Let's say you have a business and the governor decides he's going to regulate our business. And he says, Mark, your business, from here on out, you can raise your prices half the rate of inflation. Great. So if I have a business and I sell a product for $100, costs $90. I go forward 1 year, I have 10% inflation. I'm just using simple numbers. At that point in time, my costs go from $90 to $99. My revenue goes from $100 to $105. So now I'm making $6 versus $10 every year. Go forward another year of 10% inflation. My 105 becomes $110.25 of revenue. My costs go to 108. So you can see how this is shrinking. One more year, my revenue goes $115.75. My costs are now $118.80. So how did we get here? It's a simple fact that we are stuck raising rates at half of the average rate of inflation over the last 3 years. When your expenses are growing at the rates that we've seen, we cannot generate the revenue to cover the costs. So I would just ask that the governor to look, when he looks at this with his tax force, I would like to ask the governor, when you ran your business before you sold it for a couple bucks, would you have been successful if someone told you you could only raise your revenues half as much as what your costs are going up? Would you have sold it for the billions of dollars you did? Probably not. These are the things that we face as a municipality. These are the pressures that we have. So I ask, as they sit with the task force, understand the pressures that we have, and we're getting to that point of a trade-off. What services do we cut if revenues are limited as they are? And what if this task force comes back and says, well, we want to limit them even more? You don't get half the rate of inflation, you get 2% a year no matter what. Municipalities across Montana will quickly go broke if that's what happens. So anyway, I wanted to end what was a great work session with a piece of news where you just go, oh, great, thanks. Why do we do this? So we do this because we love our community, love the people in our community, We fight for them on a daily basis. I was asked by someone this last weekend, Mark, please don't pick a fight with the governor. I didn't pick the fight, but I'm going to finish it.
Did you see that?